Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're tuning in from the Great American Bash or halfway around the world, we've got a jam-packed episode for you. Get ready to dive into wrestling's rich history, packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises. And remember, you can skip to your favorite moments with our chapter markers. Let's jump right into it. April 24, 2000 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Masakazu Fukuda passes away. Legal battles in the wrestling world. By Dave Meltzer. NJPW wrestler Masakazu Fukuda passed away of complications from a cerebral hemorrhage at 3:28 a.m. on April 19 in the public Kasenuma Synthesis Hospital in Kasenuma, Japan after collapsing in the ring on April 14 at a match in the same city with Katsuyori Shibata. Fukuda, 27, was rushed to the hospital when, after Shibata hit him with an elbow drop that he was supposed to kick out of. Instead he collapsed and began snoring in the ring, which caused everyone to panic. The snoring in the ring is heavily feared in both Japanese and Mexican wrestling culture because of what it signifies because of incidents in the past. It was similar to the situation with JWP woman wrestler Mariko Umeda, Plum Mariko, who passed away on August 16, 1997 after taking a powerbomb in a match the night before, not getting up, and snoring in the ring. There are major similarities in both situations because both had histories of head problems. Umeda died from an abscess in the brain and a fractured skull, a condition she may have gone into the ring with since she had been complaining of headaches for some time and had not been herself. Fukuda had suffered a similar cerebral hemorrhage and underwent brain surgery last year and had been out of action for some time before collapsing in his first match back. Fukuda underwent his second emergency brain surgery that evening. All of the wrestlers after their matches rushed to the hospital where virtually the entire company stayed much of the night, including many of the company officials that weren't on the road on tour. Shinya Hashimoto, who is off the road due to his retirement gimmick, got the word at 11 p.m. and immediately rushed into his car and made the 6-hour, one-way drive to the hospital. Fukuda never regained consciousness, spending more than 4 days in a coma before passing away. According to reports from the match, Fukuda never took any bumps on his head during the match and took nothing more than a few stiff elbows to the head, the likes of which a normal New Japan opening match would contain. Apparently both the referee and Shibata felt something was wrong even before Fukuda went down, and when he failed to kick out of the near fall, the ref counted 3 to end the match early. Fukuda, born May 17, 1972, started wrestling in high school and became one of the top amateur wrestlers in Japan. In 1994, he placed second at 82 kilograms, 180 pounds, in the Japanese National Freestyle Wrestling Championships. He then started training for a pro wrestling career with rings, but quit the camp before ever wrestling with the group. He wound up with a small indie promotion Wrestle Dream Factory, debuting on March 20, 1996 at Korakuen Hall. Because of his amateur background, while still under contract to WDF, he was able to get loaned to Tatsumi Fujinami for some independent shows he promoted using 70s style called Muga in 1997. On November 24, 1997, he teamed with Hiroyoshi Katsubo to defeat Yuji Yasurioka and Tomohiro Ishii to win a tournament for the vacant War International Junior Tag Team titles and cross-promotional tournament as the WDF team, but politics was never worked out between the two companies and they never came back to drop the titles. His first real exposure was in May of 1998 when he was brought in as an outsider for the New Japan Top of the Super Junior tournament. While only gaining one win in the tournament, over Tatsuhito Takaiwa, he impressed New Japan officials with some of his moves, in particular a delayed German suplex that popped the crowd every night. It is very rare that New Japan actually signs up a wrestler full-time from a smaller company, but Fukuda, both due to his amateur background and his pro potential, was signed to New Japan contract in January 1999 to add depth to the junior heavyweight division and be developed as a New Japan-style prelim wrestler. Rare isn't actually the word, as on the current active New Japan roster, he is the only wrestler who actually started out in Japanese indies. The only New Japan regulars not trained in Japan itself are front office worker Black Cat, Victor Mar, who started wrestling in Mexico and got a full-time position largely as a liaison for foreign wrestlers, and Shiro Koshinaka, who was originally trained by All Japan and made the switch early in his career. Fukuda's first year never got off the blocks due to the brain injury. The plan was for him to do well in the Young Lions tournament, which started on April 14, and be elevated into the heavyweight ranks and put into the GX group with fellow former amateur wrestlers Yuji Nagata, Manabu Nakanishi and Yutaka Yoshi as something of a shooter's club. Funeral services were scheduled for April 21 in Tokyo with Tatsumi Fujinami leading the pallbearers. Fukuda's death is the third stemming from collapsing while in the course of a match in Japan in less than 3 years. Besides Umeda, another woman wrestler, Emiko Kato, 23, of the Urgent promotion passed away under almost identical conditions on April 9, 1999. Kato never regained consciousness after a brain injury and subsequent brain surgery from an incident in the ring on March 31 in Fukuoka, where she took a back suplex wrong from Mariko Yoshida. Fukuda's death is the 13th known death of a pro wrestler over the past 20 years, stemming from collapsing either during or shortly after a match. The most recent was Gary Albright, a Japanese star who was working an independent show in the United States on January 7th, and ironically was being honored with a memorial event one day after Fukuda's death in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Albright, 36, suffered a fatal heart attack during a match in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. The pro wrestling television landscape for next season, which seemed days from being sorted out, is back in a holding pattern after the USA Network filed suit against WWFE, Viacom Incorporated and CBS Corporation on April 13. The suit filed in Delaware Chancery Court regards the language and interpretation of the right to match any outside offer to maintain WWF cable programming for the next 5 years, as is in the contract between the two parties. Earlier in the day, in a strange announcement, the USA Network said that it was matching the offer that CBS and Viacom put down, and thus by doing so had retained the program rights to the WWF cable package through September of 2005. WWF was not part of the announcement and had never agreed to keep its programming on USA. USA maintains that the right to match the offer only pertains to the offer as it relates to the 4 pro wrestling shows, Raw, Heat, Superstars, and Livewire, and promises of advertising and additional non-wrestling programming or even new wrestling programming shouldn't have to be matched. CBS and Viacom on April 3 made an official 5-year offer that the WWF took to USA Network to match, figuring USA would be unable to match it and they would be able to announce the CBS deal. The deal USA was asked to match included things they believed to things they shouldn't have to match because it didn't involve the 4 specific wrestling television shows they are attempting to maintain, in specific, broadcasting XFL football presumably on Sundays on UPN, a $500,000 movie developmental fund, producing a 1-hour weekly drama series on UPN, a publishing joint venture with Simon & Schuster, owned by Viacom, for new books. In addition, the Viacom and CBS offer included syndicated radio specials, hosting theme park events and an equity investment in buying WWFE stock. A Los Angeles Times article pegged the stock investment at $30 to $50 million, a lower figure than the $100 million figure that had been thrown around weeks ago. The CBS Viacom proposal was to move Raw, Superstars, and Livewire to TNN and move Sunday Night Heat to MTV. According to an article in Multi-Channel News, the lawsuit states, by tying the right of first refusal with respect to the television series to rights to different properties that Viacom and CBS wish to exploit, the offer represents a transparent and unlawful attempt by WWFE, Viacom and CBS to frustrate USA's contractual rights. The USA Network had seemingly been priming itself for losing the WWF deal, as in its publicity and advertising package for the new season, there was no mention of pro wrestling. USA Network releases have noted that even taking the Raw ratings, the highest-rated weekly series on cable, out of the USA mix, the network would still remain the top-rated cable network in prime-time ratings. What this may also be is simply that timing is of the essence, as fall season advertising pre-sales start on April 21st, and it is important for the cable networks to get their schedules somewhat locked up to get the jump on the advertising dollars. If USA is aware they are going to lose WWF, the lawsuit from a timing standpoint throws a terrible monkey wrench into the plans of both WWFE and CBS/Viacom as far as finalizing the deal. Perhaps USA is simply looking for a fast cash settlement so the companies can avoid a lengthy lawsuit and can go on with their plans. The situation involving Mike Awesome and the ECW heavyweight title took several turns over the past week, ending with the unique situation of a WCW and WWF contracted wrestler in a match, if that's what it can be called, over the ECW heavyweight title in the ECW ring. The legal controversies at first appeared settled on April 10 when ECW and WCW came to an agreement where WCW paid ECW a reported 6-figure settlement regarding the contract of Mike Alfonso and agreed to certain stipulations regarding his portrayal on the Nitro program that evening, and that he would drop the ECW title on April 13 in Indianapolis. Alfonso reportedly had a 3-year signed contract with ECW. Alfonso himself denied that to people in WCW, but if ECW had no legal hold on him, there would be no need to reach an out-of-court settlement and contract buyout on ECW's claim. There were numerous specifics of the agreement between ECW and WCW that was worked out just before the show went on the air, as to exactly what Awesome would do and how the announcers would handle it. According to ECW sources, two stipulations were violated. The main one is that the WCW announcers were to say that Awesome was the ECW champion and had a title defense upcoming that would air Friday on TNN. The other was that Awesome would not do an interview on the show, which he did. The wording of what Paul Heyman demanded and what was scripted for the WCW announcers to say has been confirmed as being identical. From watching the tape, it appeared Scott Hudson was reading the wording and was cut off by Tony Schiavone. Exactly who made that call in WCW is unclear, but a call clearly was made, since several people after the fact emphasized words to the effect that there was no way WCW was going to plug the ECW TV show on their first New Era Nitro. This led to another round of legal problems which occupied much of Bischoff's time on April 11th, and resulted in Awesome's planned segment on Thunder being cancelled and him being taken out of the building. As Heyman was aware before the show started, a clip of Awesome attacking Kevin Nash from Nitro did air at the start of Thunder. While this was going on, Heyman came up with the idea to bring in Taz as a surprise opponent to win the title, apparently formulated while eating dinner at a Chinese restaurant with the ECW production staff. Whether the original deal included shooting an angle on SmackDown, which also resulted in a week where the ECW champ went into the ring and lost when challenging for 3 different WWF major and minor titles, is unknown. Heyman called Vince McMahon, who accepted the proposal as Heyman laid it out, which at the time was for Taz to win the ECW title, then drop it on April 22nd in Philadelphia to Tommy Dreamer, although McMahon apparently was willing to have Taz drop it to anyone, with the original suggestion being to further McMahon's storylines, having Perry Saturn cost Taz the match so he wouldn't have to lose cleanly to an ECW wrestler and even could potentially use the footage to hype their own WWF angle. As of last reports, it wasn't clear whether or not Saturn would still be doing the run-in. Saturn was booked to appear on the WWF house show in Columbia, South Carolina that night, and WWF didn't appear to even consider it an issue as to the idea of needing an excuse for Taz to lose to Dreamer, or whomever, in the title match. The match itself was completely anticlimactic as compared to the backstory. Awesome showed up in Indianapolis with Doug Dillinger of WCW. Because of the belief there might have been dressing room tension involving the way Awesome left the company, he never came into the dressing room. The scenario saw Jeff Jones as Awesome's manager challenge anyone from the back to take the title from him. The crowd was into a heavy "You sold out" chant. To explain why nobody from ECW was coming out for the TV audience, the announcer said Rhino had taken out the entire locker room, which made little sense given Dreamer came out seconds later. Taz came out to a tremendous pop, at a show which up to that point had below average crowd reactions. Taz was totally pushed as his WWF gimmick, with WWF music, and even referred to as the Human Wrecking Machine as opposed to his ECW Human Suplex Machine, and on TV given the 2Z spelling of the character. The two traded punches outside the ring with neither really selling. There was a ref bump 45 seconds into the match. Dreamer came out and DDT'd Awesome and Taz used his Taz Mission finisher. The entire match lasted 1:13. Awesome got right up, not selling the finish at all, climbed the guardrail and left the building. It was a scene totally reminiscent, except with the non-broadcast quality footage, of when in 1991, Sid Vicious, who was under contract to WCW, asked for his release in the middle of a wrestling war because Vince McMahon had promised him the main event against Hulk Hogan for the 1992 WrestleMania. Jim Herd, who was running WCW, allowed him out of his contract rather than fight it, as long as Vicious agreed to put over El Gigante in St. Petersburg in his final match, a stretcher match. As it turned out, Vicious laid down for the pin in the most unconvincing manner possible, didn't ride the stretcher, got right up after the pin, and walked out not selling a thing. While many in ECW labeled it as the greatest moment in company history because Heyman manipulated a WWF wrestler to beat a WCW wrestler and thus stuck it to WCW as a response for WCW stealing the world champion, although Bischoff was aware of who Awesome was going to lose to and how it would be done, and had to give his okay to the scenario since Awesome was at this point under contract with WCW. Many in wrestling, including several wrestlers in the company, had a 180-degree divergent viewpoint. The upside is that ECW and the ECW belt, as well as Dreamer, got exposure on WWF television. The downside is the ECW belt was positioned similar to the NWA heavyweight title when Dan Severn wore it on WWF television, although Severn never actually did jobs while wearing the belt. When the footage aired on ECW television, it seemed like it was something that may as well have never taken place as opposed to something historically significant. The footage itself wasn't even of television broadcast quality. If the idea was to embarrass Awesome on his way out, it seemingly accomplished the opposite. It took two guys to beat him in a match so short that nobody got over, and the guy winning wasn't even from the company. As one wrestler in the company put it, it was like somebody raped your sister, and then you went out and bought him a birthday present, and nobody has answered why Awesome wasn't beaten clean, unless it was a concession that had to be made to appease Bischoff, let alone by someone in the company in what looked like a wrestling match as opposed to coming in and making it obvious they were giving back the title to get out of a contract. Awesome had gone through the ECW locker room and Heyman had kept him strong with the idea he and Rob Van Dam would the ultimate big money program, and he never returned the favor by putting over someone from the company he'd eaten up. To make matters worse, that same night Taz was seen on WWF television being pinned by Crash Holly in a hardcore title match. 2 nights later he was in Madison Square Garden, never even acknowledged as champion, and was pinned by Eddie Guerrero challenging for the European title, one of WWF's 2 comedy belts, in the second match on the card after taking a low blow from China. The same thing happened the next night in Pittsburgh, another key ECW house show market. On the Monday television, he came out wearing the belt, and that wasn't even a definite, as late as the day before the show, and was acknowledged as ECW champion, with Jim Ross saying he had won it on his day off in less than 3 minutes, with no mention of Awesome, who the WWF perceived as not being a big enough star to even be worth mentioning, clearly giving the perception of the ECW title as something any top WWF wrestler could win without much effort. Taz then challenged for the hardcore title, the other comedy belt, in a 3-way, and lost, although he wasn't pinned. At SmackDown held in Philadelphia, ECW's home market, they had the illusory champion versus champion match with Helmsley. Helmsley broke Taz's winning maneuver and then set Taz up for the pedigree. Dreamer got on the apron and Helmsley shoved him to the floor. Dreamer grabbed a chair, swung at Helmsley, who ducked, and of course hit Taz to build the angle for their match 4 days later in the same city. Triple H then delivered a pedigree to Dreamer and pinned Taz. While it is antiquated thinking to take wins and losses too seriously in the US at this point because everyone is fully aware that aspect of wrestling is manipulated and it's not as important who does the job in a match anymore. But what is an 80s thinking is this? Positioning is 100% real and it's the single most important thing for every wrestler and every company in the business today. While it doesn't matter who wins and loses matches, it is 100% important what position people and companies are put in on shows to how the public perceives their importance and star power. The ECW World Title belt was positioned as being important enough that the champion appeared on the second match in Madison Square Garden without even being acknowledged as champion, and important enough, or unimportant enough for the champion to go on Raw and challenge for the hardcore title. In exchange for that positioning, the belt and the company got more national exposure than it ever had before. Was it worth it to the NWA for Severn, and is it worth it to ECW ultimately for Dreamer? Taz will drop the belt to whomever, and probably however Heyman wants, and hopefully in as good a match as possible this time to make at least the new champion appear to have earned something. This will almost surely never be acknowledged on WWF television. There are no plans at this point to have Dreamer come back to WWF to gain any revenge on Helmsley. But there is a working relationship and an angle could conceivably happen, but it's very doubtful WWF would allow Dreamer to be positioned as Helmsley's equal in that situation. If it is Dreamer who gets the title, it'll immediately be questioned within the business because it comes across as if Heyman is so concerned about losing talent that he's now putting his belt on the one wrestler he trusts won't be leaving, because Dreamer simply can't be taken by anyone as a serious major world champion. It's almost like the final period of the AWA when all the champs kept leaving and Vern Gagne finally put the belt on his son-in-law Larry Zbyszko, who at the time nobody took as a real world heavyweight champion. But by that point the perception wasn't as important as simply not having another champion simply disappear with no notice. If it helps ECW ratings this week, it may be good, at least short term. But that's an offshoot of the same argument used by smaller promotions. See the fate of NWA or Smoky Mountain Wrestling when it started interacting with the WWF, but in that argument it was the helping attendance, as opposed to ratings, which only served to establish the local stars as opposed to guys on the level of the national stars, but they just appear locally in the eyes of the local fans. That's the death perception of a promotion for healthy long-term business when it comes to attracting a mainstream audience. The rating for the April 14th TNN show 1.12, the title match itself drew a 1.11, after all the internet hype had to be a huge disappointment since the company's average over the months of February and March was a 1.06. The ECW Arena show on April 22nd is sold out, but according to company officials, due to it being CyberSlam, it was almost sold out and had the fastest advance in the building in company history long before any of this took place. The WCW turnaround that began less than 1 week earlier was met with mixed but skewing more on the positive side reviews for its first major show, Spring Stampede, on April 16th at the United Center in Chicago. The 14-match show, which was loaded up with angles, saw tremendous heat put on the new blood as heels, featured more inspired work from the wrestlers than in months, was generally considered the best WCW pay-per-view show since last year's spring Stampede in Tacoma, Washington. Still, with the quality of most of the WCW pay-per-view shows over the past year, that's not in many cases even praiseworthy enough to categorize it as a good show. But it was an improvement, and only time will tell if hard work, lots of angles, and finishes that are almost all screw jobs and often completely lack consistency, with a product with WWF fingerprints all over it, done with an edge, will pay dividends to the WCW audience. The early signs are that it will, and even at worst, is a huge improvement over the previous regime. But there were still more bad matches than good, and the main event finish really hurt what up to that point had been the best match on the show. It was the exact same finish as WrestleMania, set up the exact same way, just 2 weeks later. As it was being set up and telegraphed, it left the show with this feeling that WCW today is nothing but a copy of old WWF angles. As mentioned many times before, probably the single most overrated quality of a wrestling booker is creativity. A booker's job is to get results, not to make up a whole bunch of things never seen before in wrestling. Most of the best bookers in history have largely copied ideas that have worked elsewhere, and there is no crime in doing so. There should be no points for creativity if it doesn't achieve the actual goals, improving ratings, buy rates and attendance. And if repeating things that have already been done, with a new cast of characters, yields the same results it did with the old cast, that is good booking. If it doesn't, then it isn't. With Chicago as the #1 wrestling market in the world right now, it was WCW's most successful event in months from a live show perspective, as they sold 8,377 tickets for $272,930 and had another 4,179 comps out. To give the impression it was a near sellout in a building set up for a 16,267 seat capacity due to the pay-per-view set would be totally misleading, but it did better than the previous 3 WCW pay-per-view events in that regard. The story of the show was putting heat on the heels, who wound up with every championship, all of which went into the show vacant. Jeff Jarrett got the WCW heavyweight title when Kimberly turned on DDP using a guitar instead of a chair in a scene visually identical to the WrestleMania finish. Scott Steiner won the US title when Vampiro, reprising a former Undertaker role, dragged Sting under the ring, Hema bloody, and was then beaten in the tournament finals. Shane Douglas and Buff Bagwell won the tag team titles when Vince Russo, reprising a McMahon family member, put on the ref shirt after stopping ref Nick Patrick from making the count, and Brian Clark and Brian Adams attacked Luger, who teamed with Ric Flair, wrestling the tournament in street clothes, costing him the match. The Cruiserweight title match, which was a huge disappointment, wound up with Chris Condito winning due to help from the debuting Tammy Sytch. Terry Funk was the only NB member to win a title, which was because there was no NB member in the match, beating Norman Smiley in a surprisingly strong match. If you say this is nothing but a combination of WWF booking and the NWO, you're right. But if it works, there's nothing wrong. They also added a new element to the product, a lot of swearing, even by the announcers, which came off badly forced and out of character, which it was. The swearing was done under orders, and not all of the announcers were comfortable with it, nor with standards and practices. 1. Ric Flair, Richard Fliehr, and Lex Luger. Larry Fole won the first round of the tag title tournament in a 4-on-2 match over the Mamalukes, Vito Lograsso and John Hugger, and Ron and Don Harris in 6-11. The Harris twins weren't scheduled, but Russo, who came out to the Road Warriors entrance music in Chicago, which means they'd be passing up an angle not to bring the Road Warriors in, announced it would be a 4-on-2. After Disco Inferno interfered, Liz ducked Disco. 2 guys who didn't look like wrestlers then dragged Disco away. Flair, who sold most of the way, made a surprisingly cold hot tag to Luger. Luger at one point waited for a month for Vito to come off the top rope. Vito hit Johnny on a spot and Luger racked Johnny. 1 1/4. Mike Awesome did an interview. Bam Bam Bigelow came out. Awesome seemingly backed down. Bigelow turned his back and left. How many times have we seen that? 1. Awesome jumped him. 2. Mancow Muller pinned Jimmy Hart in 2:48. Because this match had gotten no TV push, it should have been a pre-show dark match because Muller isn't known nationally. Hart, who played heel in this match even though he's a face on TV as Hogan's manager, came out with a bald-headed new physique Emery Hale as his bodyguard. Mancow came out with 1,000,000 women, one of whom nearly killed herself walking on the world's most dangerous set. Mancow thanked Eric Bischoff, who is a heel. He then began kissing up to Chicago to the point you'd almost want to gag. Apparently a lot of the people there did because Muller got booed more than cheered even as he was kissing up to the fans. After a ref bump, Hale pressed Mancow over his head and threw him out of the ring onto some of his seconds, called Al Roker Jr. and Turd. Mancow ended up getting the pin after a chair shot. I've seen worse celebrity matches, which is about the nicest thing to say about this one. After the match, Kidman came out and stomped the hell out of Hart. Dud. 3. In the first round of the U.S. title tourney, Scott Reach Steiner beat Wall Jerry Toot via DQ in 3:53. Wall choke slammed ref Mark Johnson through a table, which was so devastating Johnson came back to be bumped later in the show. Billy Silverman called for the DQ. Dud. Ernest Miller was doing an interview for his upcoming match with Awesome, but Bigelow beat him up. 4. In another U.S. title tourney match, Mike Alfonso made his in-ring debut for WCW, pinning Ernest Miller, even though the match started as a singles match against Scott Bigelow, in 4 minutes. There was a loud ECW chant. Awesome, obviously, was never referred to as a former ECW champion. Awesome did his big dive over the top. Awesome, after being whipped into the guardrail, kept screaming at a spectator to get out of the way. Finally he got the message, allowing Bigelow to take the bump over the rail to where the spectator wasn't. Awesome did a running dive over the rail. They clearly had the chance to put on a good match. Not so fast. Miller came out and kicked Bigelow and started dancing while Awesome was selling. Awesome got up and destroyed Miller, pinning him with a high frog splash. 2.25 stars. 5. In a tag title tourney match, Shane Douglas, Troy Martin, and Buff Bagwell, Marcus Bagwell, beat Harlem Heat 2000, Lane Huffman and Tony Norris in 2:41 when Douglas pinned Ray with what was supposed to be a fisherman buster. About halfway into the move, Douglas lost Ray, but didn't hurt him. This was a real test for Douglas and Bagwell, having to carry the worst tag team in wrestling, and it was better than it looked on paper. Dud. 6. Sting, Steve Borden, pinned Booker Huffman, in 6:34 in a U.S. title tourney first round match. Actually, I'm not sure if Booker is Booker T or not. Dave Penzer announced him as Booker T. The TV announcers just called him Booker, except in one instance when he was called Booker T, Sting got a huge pop, almost shockingly large. Booker did everything but carried it to a good match before Sting won with a Scorpion Death Drop, reverse DDT. The two shook hands after the match, which was another instance for Russo and Bischoff to get mad at Booker. 3 stars. 7. Vampiro Ian Hodgkinson pinned Billy Kidman, Peter Gruner, in the final U.S. title tourney first round match in 8:28. A lot of big moves early, but the match got no heat. Then Hogan showed up and was clearly the star of the show, which he should have been since he was responsible for selling most of the tickets, not selling anything as far as limping, but he was taped up in the ribs and shoulder. Hogan destroyed Kidman to the point because of the size difference and the manner it was done. It actually looked like child abuse. He gave him a neck-hanging tree slam onto the announcer's table, which didn't break. He then body slammed him through the table and Vampiro pinned him. There was actually an attempt at an explanation as to why there was no DQ called, because Vampiro hadn't asked for Hogan to interfere. 2.5 stars. Hogan then went after Bischoff. Russo told Bischoff he had a plan. Just before Hogan was going to throttle him, Russo came out with the police, who all pulled guns on Hogan, and he backed off. Hogan sold the guns. I figured unless they had kryptonite, he was just going to stand there and have the bullets bounce off his chest. The cops handcuffed him and dragged him out. Ever notice that in wrestling, the police never read guys their rights? 8. Terry Funk pinned Norman Smiley in 8:02 to win the hardcore title. The match started when Smiley wouldn't come out as he was hiding in the bathroom. Funk slammed him on a table. Smiley put Funk upside down into a garbage can. Funk destroyed Smiley with a laptop. Smiley climbed a pipe and was treed. Funk pounded him until he fell off the pipe through a table. Smiley destroyed Funk with all the chair shots. I hate watching Funk take chair shots to the head. They came back to the ring and Funk was bleeding from the elbow. He took a bunch more chair shots to the head. He must have been hurting because he was putting his hands up to block them, which he usually doesn't do. Funk pulled out a ladder. Dustin Rhodes came out and delivered more chair shots to Funk's head. At least Rhodes was pulling back a lot on them. Rhodes pile-drove Funk on a chair. They set up what was supposed to be a teeter-totter ladder spot with Rhodes and Smiley getting nailed, but it was totally botched. Funk then had to take the ladder and throw it over the top rope onto Smiley on the floor, and Funk pinned him on the floor. 2.75 stars. 9. Steiner beat Awesome in 3:14 in the US title tourney semifinal. Steiner was rubbing Awesome's face in the mat and being particularly vicious with him. Awesome made a comeback until Kevin Nash came out and hit him with a crutch and Steiner won with the Steiner recliner. 1 star. Russo fired Rhodes for screwing up the finish. He told Rhodes the only good character he ever had was Goldust and said he wrote all the words for him to say. Rhodes said he was the one who delivered the lines. Why didn't Russo just tell him he screwed up the teeter-totter spot as well? 10. Sting pinned Vampiro in the other US title tourney semifinal in 5:59. Vampiro didn't sell well for Sting. There were clearly lots of problems in this match, but the announcers were trying to sell it like it was a classic. That's where they blow credibility, is when they try and sell a classic that isn't there. Then nobody believes it. That's another example of Jim Ross being the best at this, because if a bunch of spots are missing, he may not say it's a bad match, although he sometimes hints when it's really bad, but he won't say it's a classic either. Vampiro missed something. Who knows what it was supposed to be, because it appeared Sting was totally out of position and Vampiro tried to change his idea and didn't make it. Sting used the Scorpion Death Drop and Scorpion Deathlock for the submission. 3/4 of a star. Before the Cruiserweight title match started, Shannon Moore and Shane Helms came out to lip sync. 11. Chris Candido, won the Cruiserweight title in 5:12 over Moore, Juventud Guerrera, Eduardo Aníbal Gonzalez, Half Copy, Mike Hayner, Crowbar, Chris Ford, and Lash LaRue, Mark LaRue. This was advertised as an elimination match, but without warning the rules were changed to first pin. The first hint of that was when guys were breaking up pins after the match had started. This was really disappointing. A bunch of spots thrown out there with not enough time to get anything over. Daphne did a flying Hurricane Rana off the top onto Crowbar. LaRue did a Pescado, Artist did a springboard plancha, Guerrera did a plancha, Moore did a crazy dive off Helms, who wasn't in the match, back. David Flair, also not in the match, attacked Helms. Artist and Candido were both in the ring and Artist used a Samoan drop and went to the top when Tammy Sytch came out and knocked him off the top and Candido pinned him. This wasn't on camera, but Sytch was the victim of the world's most dangerous ramp and fell flat on her butt when she came out for the run-in, which is why they were clearly on pause waiting for something to happen. It should also be mentioned that every time Elizabeth came out, they had carpeting put over the world's most dangerous entranceway so she wouldn't be embarrassed trying to navigate that thing in high heels. They did a Paisley/Sytch confrontation, which included Sytch giving Moore a low blow and Paisley giving ref Charles Robinson 1.5 stars. 12. Douglas and Bagwell won the tag titles over Flair and Luger 8:29. Russo came out with a baseball bat to do commentary. Did I mention there was tons of swearing on this show? You know things are bad when Schiavone starts swearing on the air. Flair's selling was good enough to keep the match decent, but when Luger worked with both guys, particularly Douglas, it was bad. Flair had Douglas pinned after Bagwell hit Douglas with a blockbuster. Russo pulled ref Nick Patrick out of the ring. Poor Patrick had to sell for Russo beating him up so Russo could steal his ref shirt. Brian Clark and Brian Adams then came out and destroyed Luger so Bagwell could pin him with Russo counting the fall. 2.25 stars. 13. Steiner pinned Sting to win the US title in 5:33. These two are longtime friends and have had some great matches in the past. It was a hot match until, you guessed it, a ref bump. Vampiro came from under the ring and dragged Sting down to hell, as they said. Well, that's the same thing they said when Undertaker did it to Kevin Nash. Sting came up bleeding from the mouth. Apparently they wanted Sting covered in blood, but that was as far as he'd go and Steiner used the recliner for the win. 2.75 stars. 14. Jeff Jarrett pinned Diamond Dallas Page Falkenberg, in 15:02 to win the vacant WCW heavyweight title. Page, smart promoter that he is, littered the building with signs promoting his book. You don't actually believe fans would bring signs like that to a show, do you? He even had a spot where Jarrett tore up a copy of the book. Bischoff came out. This was a really good match. Jarrett had a long figure 4. Page tried to reverse it but got a rope break. Page got a few quick cradles and a uranage for a near fall. Page moved amazingly well for someone who has been out of action for so long with a back injury that didn't even heal until his former next-door neighbor was back in charge. Finish saw Bischoff distract Charles Robinson, who took a bump halfway through the match to tease a near fall from a belt shot by Jarrett, and Kimberly got in the ring holding the guitar and clocked Page with it for the pin. All the champs came to the ring to celebrate with Russo and Bischoff to end the show. 3.5 stars. Kenta Kobashi captured the first champion carnival tournament of his career, pinning surprise finalist Takao Omori in 25-12 after a lariat before an announced full house of 16,300 at Tokyo Budokan Hall. Omori worked on Kobashi's leg for most of the match, which saw Kobashi make a comeback doing a powerbomb into the turnbuckles, a second powerbomb and a lariat for the pin. In what was heavily pushed in both house show advertising and on the commemorative t-shirt as the 20th annual tournament, which started in 1973, but there was no tournament from 1983-90 due to booking difficulty in a period when the top stars didn't want to do jobs, and reopened in an era when every wrestler in the company did jobs after the company went to the all-clean finish booking style, with a winner's history, was a single elimination for the first time since 1975. This meant fewer marquee matchups than any recent tournament and probably the least interest of any carnival tournament in history. The carnival tournament in the past, particularly the ones booked by Shohei Baba with his famed Rubik's Cube booking, where all the jobs are laid out perfectly to give almost everyone some sort of positive upward momentum and keep several people in contention going into the final days, used to have intrigue going into the final show with several people involved and numerous possibilities for the finals. This year, several days ahead, the final match was announced in a tournament that really only benefited Omori, who had never done well or been pushed as a top singles star in the past. And this time scored his 3 highest profile singles wins of his career, over Jun Akiyama, Mike Barton and Steve Williams, all in a row before losing, and Kobashi, who won the tournament for the first time with wins over Johnny Ace, Johnny Smith, Mitsuharu Misawa, and Omori. Kobashi had lost in the finals to Vader last year and losing in the finals after a 3-way playoff in 1997 won by Toshiaki Kawada. The Spring Carnival Tournament actually stems from the old World League Tournament originated by Rikidozan in 1959 in the Old Japanese Wrestling Association, which Baba renamed in 1973 after formation of All Japan Pro Wrestling. The tournament history since its inception. 1959, Rikidozan beat Jesse Ortega. 1960, Rikidozan beat Leo Nomalini. 1961, Rikidozan beat Mr. X, Big Bill Miller. 1962, Rikidozan beat Luthez. 1963, Rikidozan beat Killer Kowalski. 1964, Toyonobori beat Gene Kiniski. 1965, Toyonobori beat Fred Blassie. 1966, Giant Baba beat Wilbur Snyder. 1967, Baba Big the Destroyer. 1968, Baba beat Kowalski. 1969, Antonio Inoki beat Chris Markoff. 1970, Baba beat Don Leo Jonathan. 1971, Baba beat Abdullah the Butcher. 1972, Baba beat Gorilla Monsoon. 1973, Baba beat Mark Lewin. 1974, Baba beat Mr. Wrestling Tim Woods. 1975, Baba beat Kiniski. 1976, Butcher beat Baba. 1977, Baba beat Jumbo Tsuruta. 1978, Baba beat Butcher. 1979, Butcher beat Tsuruta. 1980, Tsuruta beat Dick Slater. 1981, Baba beat Bruiser Brody. 1982, Baba won via points over Brody, Ted DiBiase and Tsuruta. 1991, Tsuruta beat Stan Hansen. 1992, Hansen beat Mitsuharu Misawa. 1993, Hansen beat Misawa. 1994, Toshiaki Kawada beat Steve Williams. 1995, Misawa beat Akira Taue. 1996, Taue beat Williams. 1997, Kawada beat Kenta Kobashi in a 3-way playoff with Misawa. 1998, Misawa beat Jun Akiyama. 1999, Madrid Kobashi. Reports from the UFC Japan show held April 14 at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym 2 indicate it was the strongest by far of the 3 UFC events held in the Tokyo area. The show, which airs on pay-per-view in the United States on April 21, was headlined from an American standpoint by Tito Ortiz capturing the UFC middleweight title left vacant by Frank Shamrock with a 5-round decision over Vanderlei Silva of Brazil. The scorecards were relatively one-sided, with Ortiz winning 49-47, 49-46 and 49-46, by using his wrestling ability to dominate positioning in what was regarded in Japan as a boring match. The show drew a crowd announced as a sellout of 3,850 fans to the gym, although live reports indicate it was just shy of capacity to that the real figure would have been around 2,500 to 3,000, much of which was papered as one report has the paid figure at 1,000. Basically the Tokyo area super hardcore shoot fan population, since this show had no general public appeal during a time period when there are 3 marquee Tokyo Dome shows and numerous typical minor shows all in the same market over a 7-week period. Still, UFC Japan officials announced they would run 2 more shows this year, one in late July and another in December. The company can survive whether people buy tickets or not because DirecTV in Japan pays the pay-per-view rights fees for the events. The next UFC is at this point scheduled for June 9th in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, at this point most likely headlined by the Kevin Randleman vs. Pedro Rizzo UFC heavyweight title match that was postponed in March due to Randleman's concussion backstage just hours before the match was to take place. 1. Laverne Clark won a much tougher fight than expected over Koji Oishi, going the 3-round time limit, 15 minutes, and getting the nod from 2 of the 3 judges by a 29-28 score, with the other voting at 29-29. Oishi, a college wrestler who weighed only 156 pounds at the weigh-in, put up a very strong performance against someone who had him outsized, winning one of the rounds on all 3 cards. Clark was 169 at weigh-in but probably in the ring at around 175 to 180 and had trained specifically for the match. Clark's scheduled opponent, Dayu Takase, suffered a knee injury in training and Oishi took the fight on just a few days' notice. Reports are he was able to use his wrestling to somewhat neutralize Clark's strong boxing skills, and hung on and was competitive. 2. In what was called almost unanimously as the best match on the show, Ikuiza Minowa of Pancrase defeated Joe Slick of Extreme Challenge when the doctor stopped the match at 2:02 of the 3rd round. This was something of a grudge match since on the previous UFC show in Japan, Slick defeated Pancrase star Jason DeLucia, who ended up having his knee destroyed when it went the wrong way on a fall, in a Thiesman-esque injury. The match was considered very even, with Minowa coming in at only 179 pounds while Slick was at 198. Minowa unleashed a flurry of blows, ending with a high kick to the left side of his face which opened him up so severely that within seconds his head was covered in blood. Ref John McCarthy stopped the action to have the doctor check the cut, and he stopped the match. The injury wasn't serious. 3. Ron Waterman, at 260 pounds, overpowered 218-pound Satoshi Honma for all of their 3-round fight, winning a unanimous decision. Waterman, a former college heavyweight wrestler with a Goldberg-like look, continually took Honma down and pounded on him from the side mount. The only crowd pop was when Waterman took off his shirt. At one point Waterman hit Honma with 24 unanswered punches and 7 knees, but Honma was never totally out of it even though he got almost no offense in. Honma took no risks and seemingly was just trying to survive. 4. Sanae Kikuta of Pancrase, 198, defeated Eugene Jackson, 197, in 4:38. Both men came into the octagon ill. Jackson had a fever and the flu, while Kikuta was also sick. Once the match started, Kikuta showed no signs of being ill while Jackson never got untracked. Kikuta out-wrestled him the entire match before winning with an armbar submission. This was also considered something of Pancrase revenge match since Jackson on the last Japanese show had knocked out Pancrase fighter Kei Yamamiya. 5. Ortiz, 198, fighting at 213 in the ring and said to be in by far the best condition he has ever fought at that weight, won the middleweight title after a 5-round decision over Silva, 198. The first, third, and fifth round consisted of Ortiz taking a few punches before stopping Silva's offense by taking him down and controlling him on the ground. In the second round, Ortiz landed a strong punch knocking Silva down and leaving him wobbly. Silva's knees buckled between rounds. In the fourth round, Silva caught Ortiz with a strong punch and knocked him silly, but was unable to finish him off. Ortiz was the big favorite of the American fans at the show. The Japanese generally considered the match boring and the fans lost interest in the long match. Ortiz had a smart strategy, as Silva usually tries to make a move on wrestlers when they shoot. Ortiz refused to shoot, and would wait for Silva to commit himself to punches before he'd take him down as a counter. 6. In the main event for Japan, pro wrestler Yoji Anjo, trimmed down to his best condition in years at 196 pounds, lost to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu former world champion Murillo Bustamante, 199. Anjo, the only Japanese mainstream name fighter on the show, got the biggest pop coming out. Anjo is the managing director of the UFC Japan company, but nobody takes him seriously as a legitimate opponent for such a high-level fighter. When Bustamante started taking control, the crowd began to catcall Anjo, saying he should try and sucker punch him, or screaming at Anjo that Akira Maeda, who Anjo sucker punched backstage in the hall at the last UFC show in Japan and was later brought up on charges for it, was there. Bustamante, who is undefeated in MMA competition, dominated him throughout the fight, winning at 38 of the second round with a katagatame, a head and shoulders side choke. Japanese reports were that Bustamante looked far better than Rickson Gracie has ever looked fighting in Japan. Anjo got little offense in, and in frustration, tried a haymaker punch that Bustamante easily sidestepped in the second round. In yet another strange story stemming from the split in the Hart family, Stampede Wrestling announced a Stu Hart 85th birthday show in conjunction with the World Wrestling Federation for Calgary, and the next day Hart said he wouldn't be attending, leaving everyone politically jockeying for position. The story probably started more than 1 month ago. Bruce Hart, who is running the Stampede Wrestling promotion with brother Ross, shows that Stu regularly attends when they run Calgary, was talking about doing some sort of a memorial show in honor of Owen, since it was coming up for the 1-year anniversary of his death. We're told in order to make it politically more palatable, due to the lawsuit involving the death of Owen which had divided the family, it was planned to be dressed up as an 85th birthday celebration for Stu, whose actual birthday is on May 3rd, and the show was scheduled for May 31st at the 7,000-seat Stampede Corral, home of Stampede's biggest shows during its glory days in the 70s and 80s. Bruce first contacted Vince McMahon and Jim Ross by fax about it, and they approved allowing the wrestlers, since it would be held on an off day and as things were booked, the WWF would be in that part of the world with house shows the previous weekend in Calgary and Edmonton and television tapings on May 29th and May 30th in Vancouver and Tacoma, Washington. According to WWF officials, it was to be a birthday celebration for Stu, similar to the show held in 1995 for Stu's 80th birthday, which saw many of Stu's biggest stars from the past attend. They would shoot angles at the May 27th house show to build for May 31st, and WWF would book the matches involving its talent on the show. It is clear that many members of the family were in regular contact with the WWF, in particular Bruce Pritchard, according to some reports almost on a daily basis. Regarding the show, in particular Ellie and Diana, whose husbands Jim Neidhart and Davey Boy Smith work for the WWF, and who are expected to testify against sister-in-law Martha Hart in the wrongful death lawsuit that goes to court in February of 2001 in Kansas City, and where depositions with family members have already started. At a recent television taping, the wrestlers who signed up were claiming to be under the impression it was more something for Owen and it was approved by everyone in the family, and not a political issue, with the belief it was not political and that Brett and Martha would be part of the show. They may not have been told that specifically, but likely thought that because they'd be under the impression any benefit for Owen or a birthday for Stu would involve the family and it wouldn't become part of a political game of taking sides. Virtually all the Canadian-based wrestlers, including Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, Edge, Christian, Pest, and Val Venus, signed up, as well as many other major stars including Eddie Guerrero, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko. The belief is they were working the show free, as they agreed to do for benefit shows in the past, such as for Brian Pillman, and the WWF would pay for the trans. The show was publicly announced on April 15th on the Stampede Wrestling website with a Jericho vs. Benoit main event, and also listed Terry and Dory Funk, who wrestled on Stu's 80th birthday show, as being expected to attend. And it started falling apart from there. The next morning there was an article in the Calgary Sun headlined "Hart Slams Event," quoting Stu as saying he wouldn't take part in the event because it was too close to the 1-year anniversary of Owen's death. "They can do whatever they like, but I won't be involved. I would like to support Ross and Bruce in this, but it would be in poor taste for me to be celebrating." It also should be noted that Stu is involved in the lawsuit against the WWF. Whether Stu ever even knew about this event before it was announced publicly has been questioned. There are those who claim Bruce Pritchard, who was the company point man for the event, spoke with Stu personally and he claimed to be looking forward to the event. Others claim Stu knew nothing about it until it was already out publicly and that Bruce Hart had brought it up with Helen Hart for approval and she said no. On April 15th, both Bruce and Brett were at the house talking with Stu, who refused to be part of the show. Bruce had stayed out of the lawsuit, even though he actually spoke publicly strongly against the actions of the WWF after the death of Owen. From a business standpoint, Stampede Wrestling's best chance for long-term survival would be as a training ground for WWF or WCW developmental talent, and politically it would be easier to work with WWF. In the same newspaper article, Brett was quoted as saying, "My father has no involvement with the birthday show, he wasn't aware it was being planned. He has nothing to do with the WWF." Martha, the widow of Owen, in the same article claimed the WWF is trying to take the legal battle outside the courts to score points in the arena of public opinion, saying, "They're going to come in here and try to do something that's in poor taste and I'm ready for that." When the situation came out on April 15th, several of the WWF wrestlers that had signed up were wanting to pull out. Benoit in particular, at Raw, asked out of his commitment, feeling he was misled about what the show was going to be, and that all it would end up being was a Stampede Wrestling major house show. McMahon that day directly gave word that everyone who signed up had to attend unless the show is cancelled, apparently because some people started taking it as another Vince versus Brett battle that he didn't want to be seen as coming out on the losing end of. Stampede Wrestling has removed any mention of the show from its website, but the show was not officially cancelled as of press time. It only took EMLL one show to get the pay-per-view formula down, but it was a completely different formula than everyone else. The oldest pro wrestling company in the world's first ever pay-per-view show in Mexico on March 17th, headlined by what will clearly go down in history as one of the classic struggles in lucha libre history in the mask versus mask match with Atlantis versus Villano Tercero, was probably the best pay-per-view event so far this year. It was almost an amazing show, with the drastic changes in such a short time in US wrestling, and the relative lack thereof in EMLL, which, like all Japan, remains a traditional old-style and some would even say antiquated style of wrestling. Watching this EMLL show, as different as American and lucha libre style of wrestling are from a psychology standpoint, was more like watching old-style US wrestling than any major show in the world this year. It worked like a charm to its audience, with strong heat in every match on the show, and a climactic pop, the likes of which is almost never seen on any level in this industry. Whether this is good or bad in an industry so heavily driven by youth, is that the sellout crowd reported at 20,000 overflowing Arena Mexico, listed capacity of 17,670, clearly had the widest demographic range of any major show this year. You saw old people, some very old, very young people, and many in the middle, all reacting almost as one, in some very unique ways at times. It's unusual in this day and age to see, not just a standing ovation, but people jumping up and down at a finish like the one in the main event. It's unheard of seeing audience members old enough to be great-grandparents showing such enthusiasm. This would bring up the natural comparison with the 1994 AAA When Worlds Collide pay-per-view at the Los Angeles Sports Arena, and as good as the show was, it couldn't compare to the AAA show. It didn't have the overall work rate, and as good as the crowd enthusiasm was for this show, it still was a good 2 steps behind Los Angeles. And even if the masked match was as good, if not better, than any match this year, it couldn't hold a candle to the masked match in Los Angeles. But I'd strongly recommend seeing this match to almost any wrestling fan. For older fans who don't like the current US style, this has every element missing. For newer fans who have never seen what the older style was at its best, while they may not enjoy it because there was no brawling, no objects, no run-ins, no referee bumps and no sex, at least it's a chance to see what some people romanticize about and what people who have cloudy memories of the past think wrestling was, but only in the rarest of circumstances in those days it really was. This show had its aged veteran performers with big names in bad matches. The crowd was into their 2 matches every bit as much as the better matches with the younger wrestlers. But in the year 2000 it was unique to see very long dramatic matches, old-style crowd intensity from a packed house, modern production values, clean finishes in every match, and not a referee bump nor a run-in. 1. Ricky Marvin won February 3rd falls from Sangre Azteca in 9:50. These two are young, very small high flyers. Marvin, with his acrobatic spots, is becoming something of a hardcore favorite in Japan. They had a good opener, with the only negative being it was too short for a 3-fall match. Marvin in the first fall did a springboard corkscrew plancha to the floor which looked far more impressive than it sounds. In the second fall Azteca did a tope con hilo and landed straight down on his head from the top rope to the floor when Marvin didn't catch him. This looked unbelievably scary, like a surefire broken neck or potentially worse. Azteca, after being stunned momentarily, got up and didn't even show any immediate effects and continued the match and won the fall after a unique move where he held Marvin in Fisherman Buster starting position and dropped him down like a shoulder breaker for the pin. Third fall saw Marvin did a springboard moonsault to the floor and a springboard screw plancha from the apron back into the ring for the pin. Marvin seemed to hurt his knee on the landing from his winning move. 3 stars. 2. Dr. O'Borman Jr. and Arcanical and Ultimo Guerrero and Zumbito and Rincor Latino and Mr. Mexico and Violencia and Rey Bucanero won Torneo Siglo 21 over Tigre Blanco and Mascara Magica, Astro Rey Jr. and Starman and Antifaz, the same wrestler who worked ECW some months back, and Tony Rivera and Safari and Olympico in an elimination match which went 24-16 with Guerrero as the final survivor. This was their typical Torneo Siglo annual match, which I guess can be described as Arena Mexico's version of the Royal Rumble with a much better work rate. It's not a battle royal, but an elimination rules match like the old Survivor Series matches, loaded up with a lot of good workers. There was far too much to this match to try and recount. There were some amazing submissions and mat work with moves never seen before in the United States. It also featured rapid-fire high spots and submissions from start to finish. The negative is that not all the workers in the ring were good, So even though they all worked fast and hard, some points were incredible and others were only so-so. The hottest move of the match was an awesome spinning dive by Antifaz on Sumito. It came down to Guerrero against Olympico, with Guerrero getting the pin after a reverse position superplex. 3 3/4 stars. 3. Brazo de Plata and Mr. Niebla and Emilio Charles Jr. won February 3 falls over Apollo Dantes and Cien Caras and Universo 2016-05. It was funny to see the heels come out and bring their own pyro to the ring. The fans were into this because they were the veteran names, but only Niebla, and in some brawling instances Charles, looked good. Super Porky is fatter than ever. He's got to be pushing 330 to 340 on a 5-4 frame, almost all right in the belly. He's reminiscent of a more agile Dusty Rhodes in his prime, as his comedy and charisma is great, and his work in other ways totally sucks. Overall a terrible match, although some of Porky's comedy got over. It ended up with Porky doing a splash off the top rope, which, since everyone doing the same basic move has a different name, ought to be named the Pig Splash on all 3 Rudos. 1/4 star. 4. Shocker and Mascara Ano 2000 and Scorpio Jr. beat Pero Aguayo and Tarzan Boy and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. in a February 3 fall match in 1730. Also mostly comedy. This match had great heat but wasn't much for the wrestling. The crowd reactions were the most unique part of the match. Of course the crowd loved Aguayo, who in the manner he's been booked over the past 10 years has been a living embodiment of how Ric Flair should have been used. Aguayo was one of Mexico's legendary heels, who got old, and the people started loving him. He's now 54 and due to all the years of incredible blade jobs, being almost a Mexican Abby, looks hideous but he's been protected in booking, knows exactly what to do and to this day remains the biggest drawing card in the entire country. The big crowd seemed to juice him up a little and as old and beat up and as many crazy bumps as he's taken in his career, he still blows away many of the older wrestlers in WCW. He is on this never-ending retirement tour which I think started when he was 48 or 49, starting to overstay his welcome, but on this show he was a friendly legend for both young and old to cling to his every move. Tarzan Boy, who worked harder than anyone else, even though he's a face and Aguayo's partner, had the fans booing the hell out of him because he's got that Evan Karagias thing going and the wrestling fans resent his push. The minute he'd tag in, the booing was unbelievable, and he couldn't stop it no matter how hard he worked and how many good moves he'd do. Then he'd tag Pero or even worse Rayo, who is really bad and has nothing going for him except he was good when he was young and his father was really charismatic, a pairing that has hardly kept Dustin Rhodes at any level of stardom in the US, and the crowd would go crazy for what little they do. Shocker and Scorpio Jr. have bleached blonde hair doing almost a Hollywood Blondes deal. It was a surprise finish to build heat for something down the line as Mascara Ano 2000, his longtime rival, pinned Aguayo after a low blow. Back in 1993, before what is believed to be the largest crowd ever to witness pro wrestling in Mexico on the semifinal of the Conan vs. Cien Caras retirement match, there's that word again, Aguayo beat Mascara in a hair versus mask match and they brought the feud back numerous times since then. 1 1/4 stars. 5. Atlantis beat Villano Tercero in their mask versus mask match in 25-28. I can only come up with 2 comparable matches this year. The Cactus Jack vs. Triple H match at the Royal Rumble and the Toshiaki Kawada vs. Kenta Kobashi match in Kawada's first match back from the eye injury. Jack vs. Triple H, through use of gimmicks, built to every bit as much drama as this match had by the end, but came nowhere close to sustaining the level of heat from start to finish and couldn't compare to the closing pop. They were entirely different as this was a totally scientific bloodbath, while that was a brawl with gimmicks. Kawada Kobashi involved 2 far better wrestlers, larger, faster, younger and harder hitting athletes. As superior athletically as that match was, and it also built to great heat, came off as a great match in the long line of All Japan great matches, but nothing anyone will remember above any of the others. This had the total aura of an all-time classic in the Jack Briscoe Dory Funk Jr. mode, but even in some ways superior, not in work or technique, but in being a memorable match in the culture, not to mention what's happened in the past month where a 47-year-old heel who has been considered past his prime for more than a decade is now the hottest wrestler in the country. The Funk Briscoe comparison, except using more modern moves to basically create the same aura, is the best for an American equivalent, and overall this is the best match I've seen this year. It was a 1-fall match, which was kind of strange since every prelim was best of 3. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. was in Atlanta's corner while V3's father, Ray Mendoza, was in his corner. The atmosphere, with 2 of the most famous masks in Mexican history at stake, was there all night before the match started, almost equivalent to the big heavyweight boxing title fight of the decade. They argued over the ref early, and got a big pop when Babe Richard, the heel ref, got tossed. It started slow for about 4 minutes until they did a spot where Villano Tercero did a tope and they cracked heads and both bladed huge. Atlantis' mask was torn up, and his white mask that wasn't torn was soaked in red. Villano was also juicing heavy, but it was less noticeable with his pink-colored mask. Atlantis was bleeding so badly they brought the doctor out to check his cut, teasing the match would be stopped and he'd have to lose his mask. It should be mentioned that the crowd was cheering both men the entire match. Whomever seemed on the verge of losing, the entire crowd would chant his name looking for a comeback. Villano went for near falls and submissions, including many old-style moves as well as moves rarely seen. Villano used a surfboard, a camel clutch with a face lock, Atlantis did a bow and arrow. Villano brought back the old abdominal stretch and Atlantis did a rocking horse. They were all the Ric Flair-style near falls. Atlantis hit a plancha about 19 minutes in. Villano did a combination abdominal stretch with an entangled arm lock combining 1950s pro wrestling with 2000 submission fighting. Every move and movement got over. At the 22 minutes mark, announcer Dr. Alfonso Morales, one of the country's most famous mainstream sportscasters who has maintained his credibility in the sport world while doing Wrestling Weekly by not overhyping and losing credibility calling what he's seeing, said in his distinctive voice that this match was an all-time classic. Atlantis got the gory special, called by Morales the gory invertiva, and fans started screaming for Villano, thinking it was the finish, and he reversed it into a sunset flip. Atlantis then got his finisher, the torture rack, which he's won most of his big matches in his career with. Villano slipped out and the place went nuts at this point. Atlantis got the rack again, then in that position, dropped down hard to his knees, theoretically putting more pressure on back, and Villano submitted. The pop, one of the most emotional I've ever seen and probably more reminiscent of the New Year's Eve 1999 pop than a pro wrestling pop, lasted 90 seconds. The big pop and the fans were still on their feet minutes later. Villanos 4 and 5 came out and put their older brother on their shoulders while fans chanted for him. He had his father, who was later in tears hugging Morales during the post-match interview, take off his mask while his young son was also in the ring. 4.5 stars. The move to regulate at least some forms of pro wrestling, but not any popular forms in New Jersey, gained strength this past week. State Assembly Democratic leader and Bayonne Mayor Joseph Doria officially announced some of the provisions for the bill he is going to introduce when the Assembly goes back in session. At the same time, so-called extreme wrestling garnered more front-page news due to a 19-year-old female wrestler suffering a broken neck in a match on April 7 in Bayonne, New Jersey. Doria, in a press release, said extreme wrestling is a grotesque and depraved activity. It's not entertainment. It's a blood sport with no redeeming value for our children. The state needs to step into the void here to regulate the fledgling extreme wrestling industry before someone gets seriously hurt. Moreover, municipalities should be empowered with the opportunity to have the final right of refusal to hosting this bizarre sort of entertainment within their borders. The legislative challenge here is to protect legitimate professional wrestling while giving the state and municipalities the legal means to control the violent sport of extreme wrestling. I applaud the governor's, Christine Whitman, speedy response to this commercialized form of brutality. Doria's bill would prohibit anyone under the age of 19 from attending what is deemed as an extreme wrestling show, which is not believed to include ECW itself despite the similarities in name, although there has actually been nothing specific on that issue spelled out anywhere. All promotions deemed as extreme would be put under the control and regulation of the State Athletic Commission, and local municipalities would be given the right to ban such events. Doria had been frustrated because as mayor of Bayonne, the home of Jersey All-Pro Wrestling, the law didn't give him the power to ban the promotion from running shows in the city. Doria's bill gained at least medium momentum due to a neck injury to Christy Timper, who wrestled under the name Christy Kiss on the April 7 show in Bayonne, New Jersey. The story took a number of strange turns, with it being placed on the front page of the Newark Star-Ledger, which broke the original story critical of Jersey All-Pro Wrestling several weeks back on the front page and has printed several stories and at least 2 editorials since that point, stemming at first from antics on a Japo show. It was these articles that directly led to the Republican governor joining with the Democratic Assemblyman for bipartisan support of new legislation. As mentioned here previously, the stories and much of the media coverage of this has been filled with inaccuracies, including portrayals that have attempted to separate so-called extreme wrestling with WWF wrestling with the idea that pro wrestling uses fake blood while extreme wrestling has wrestlers cut themselves with razor blades. Roughly 90% of the items complained about in the articles occur with regularity on WWF events, and virtually all have occurred frequently at ECW events. Both the WWF and ECW have come out publicly favoring this form of regulation. because it is believed the regulation won't apply to them. To both companies' credit, they are probably far more responsible in aspects of at least training talent than independents, but that doesn't make the product mix they are presenting, which is often not that much different, any more or less suited for children, which is the buzzword on who needs to be protected from these types of shows. Because of the media heat, Japan promoters said the April 7th show would be toned down with the elimination of controversial weapons such as cheese graters and staple guns, as well as cutting down on blading. There was juice in one match. However, Timper was power-bombed through a table and her head cracked on the floor in the landing. The injury, while serious, became an even bigger story because of the aftermath, landing it on the front page of the April 13th paper, causing comments from wrestling fans, who noted that serious injuries are not uncommon in sports, but even more comments from wrestling fans defensive and complaining about the reporter actually doing his job and exposing a promotional lie in the story. When Steve Austin was injured far more seriously in 1997 at the Meadowlands, and Darren Drozdov, who is from Mays Landing, New Jersey, was left wheelchair-bound, perhaps for life, from an accident at the Nassau Coliseum, that the same newspaper never covered either story. After the incident, Timper was diagnosed with a transverse process fracture of the C7 vertebra, or a breaking of the wing that juts out from the side of the small bone at the base of the neck. Timper, who was copying the stunt from seeing women on WWF programming take the same bump of late on television, was helped to the back room, and it was first believed she had suffered a concussion and was walking around after the show with an ice pack on her neck. Her parents took her to the emergency room the next morning where the injury was diagnosed. On April 9th, Timper posted on her website that x-rays showed she had a broken neck. 2 days later, when the paper contacted Iadavaya about the incident, he said, "We're faking her injury. It's part of the storyline. If you heard about it, I'm glad. It's good the story is getting out there. She's not really hurt, though. She'll tell you it's all fake. She's 100% fine." Timper then called the newspaper and said her neck was a little sore but that she was fine, that she never went to the hospital, but they were doing a storyline claiming that she broke her neck. But when reporters learned about the injury being real, they went to her parents' home, and she answered the door wearing a protective collar and admitted that she had broken a bone in her neck, that Iadavaya knew about the injury, but they agreed to tell people it was fake. Jeff Shapiro, the other co-owner of the company, said that the company would pay for all her hospital bills even though they weren't legally obligated. Timper, due to the injury, had to leave her job as a waitress at a pizza parlor and doesn't have medical insurance. She will be able to make a full recovery and return to wrestle in about 6 months. To make things even sleazier to the general public, Timper had wrestled earlier on the April 7th show in a women's match where she had her evening gown torn off and was left in her bra and panties. On April 14th, the newspaper ran an editorial noting that Timper was auctioning off her gown, bra and panties that she wore at the show on the internet. While that item is really irrelevant to the issues of this story, the behavior of all parties involved only served to strengthen the case of those attempting to both regulate and shut down the company, at a time when everyone in the company should have been smart enough to stay on their best behavior. Taking bumps on tables is actually far safer than it looks to the public viewing it. And it has become a staple of today's wrestling because the audience demands it due to what they've been educated to on televised wrestling. This leads what independent promoters largely have to do. They either follow television's lead and do what the current audience believes pro wrestling is, or unless they have their own television to educate and sell the audience on their version of the product, they leave audiences disappointed. But at a time when the media spotlight is on the company with the issue of regulation, even the introduction of a bill that would give communities the power to ban the promotion in general out there ready to be put on the table, the idea that they strip a woman of her clothes and power bomb her through a table on that very show is at best inviting the problems that are likely coming, whether fair logically or not, even without the freak injury that took place. The idea that they lied about the injury to the media with the spotlight on them is only begging for further embarrassment. To sell someone's bra and panties on the internet after such an incident, while totally irrelevant to the issue of regulation for reasons of danger, although an argument can be made regarding the issue of allowing young children to attend, would only serve to make the company, the people involved in the industry on the local level, to have even more of a black eye to the general public. To do this, on top of everything else, at a time when the media and political spotlight is on them, shows even worse judgment. The April 17th ratings had to be a huge blow to break up what had been a week of good momentum for WCW. Raw drew a 6.75 rating, 6.24 first hour, 7.21 seconds hour, and a 10.3 share, largely built around Linda McMahon's announcement of the return of Steve Austin. Nitro its lowest live rating since the earliest days of the program with a 2.47, 2.86 first hour, 2.09 seconds hour, and a 3.7 share. The lowest Kevin Sullivan booked show did a 2.51. The rating can't be blamed on the strength of the Raw show because the first hour did so poorly, and that was before anyone knew that Raw was opening with the title match. The total pro wrestling audience remained at 9.7 million viewers. It was the total domination of the McMahon announcement of the return of Austin, 7.68, that destroyed the overrun with the Hogan/Bischoff Nitro climax and Bret Hart cliffhanger, 1.73, that was the big story on a night of total domination by the WWF. The WWF main event of Jericho and Acolytes vs. DX drew a 6.83 final quarter and a 7.65 overrun, both above normal levels. Nitro's Jarrett vs. Scott Steiner title match drew a 2.10 quarter, terrible for a TV main event. In the battle of head-to-head quarters, Raw opened at 5.90 Triple H vs. Jericho, to 2.22 Adams and Clark vs. Vito and Johnny. Sting Vampiro confrontation, Raw went to a 6.66 Triple H vs. Jericho conclusion, to Nitro's 1.79. DDP vs. Awesome Abbott segment, Raw did a 6.01. Hardys vs. Guerrero and Rios, to 2.29. Luger vs. Douglas, Hogan brawl with Kidman, and finally Raw did a 6.32. Taz vs. Saturn vs. Crash, to 2.10. Jarrett vs. Steiner. SmackDown on April 13th drew a 4.73 rating and 7.6 share. The audience grew consistently throughout the show, peaking with The Rock and Acolytes vs. Triple H and Bossman and Buchanan main event, which did a 5.34 quarter. Thunder on April 12th was the first direct sign that the first Nitro was a major hit as it drew a 3.11 rating and 5.0 share, which is the highest rating for a Thunder since late April of last year and more than a full point higher than what the show had been averaging. The show had excellent growth over the first 70 minutes, something it hasn't shown in the past, peaking at 3.55 for the Royal Rumble-style match with the U.S. title contenders. It also fell hard, perhaps due to the production snafu, because there is no logical reason for an unopposed wrestling show that was a good show to fall hard like this. The Sting vs. Villanos and Jarrett match dropped all the way to 2.82 in the Page vs. Bigelow main event. After that fell to 2.21. In the weekend numbers for April 15th to 16th, Livewire did a 1.5, second highest on station all day, Superstars a 1.7, third highest of the day, and Heat did a 2.89, highest. WCW Saturday Night did a 1.6, which was the third highest rated show on the station all day. ECW on TNN drew a 1.12 rating, highest, and 2.0 share even with all the hype on the internet about the show. The show peaked at 1.29 for the TV title change with Tao over Crazy and Guido, and the post-match angle with Cyrus, Rhino, and Sandman. Roller Jam did in 0.69. The EMLL AAA block on Galavision on April 11th drew an 0.7 rating. Japanese television rundown. April 7th, New Japan. This was the company's first live primetime special in more than 8 years from the Tokyo Dome. It came off as just a wrestling show. Just like the US, the style in Japan has changed greatly over the past few years to look less than the old Japanese wrestling and more like worked UFC-style fights. It gives a higher realism factor but makes the matches less spectacular. 1. Takashi Iizuka beat Kazunari Murakami in 11:26. This was a UFC-style match with both fighters wearing the grappling gloves. Murakami beat the hell out of Iizuka before the bell. The style is based on Muay Thai style standing, and a ground game based on side mount, punches from the mount and submissions. It was good for the style, with Iizuka getting a great-looking sleeper but Murakami made the ropes. Iizuka got the hold in the middle for the win. 3 stars. 2. Masahiro Chono beat Great Muta via DQ in 16:21. This was American style. Chono spray-painted Team 2000 on a New Japan poster. The injuries have really taken their toll on these two. Chono is a shell, and even though Muta has been given so much time off, he's gone way downhill. He couldn't even do his handspring elbow well. He did a Frankensteiner off the top and a dragon screw, and Chono took a delayed bump from it. They even did a ref bump. Muta threw a table into the ring. When Chono moved, Muta did the handspring elbow into the table. Chono piledrove him through the table and used a double armlock submission. Muta got away and blew missed at the ref for the DQ. Fans booed the match like crazy because it was so long, didn't ever get good, and had such a bad ending. Dud. 3. Kensuke Sasaki beat Jushin Liger in 7:40 in a battle of IWGP champions. Very stiff, believable match. It was mainly trading hard blows back and forth. Liger did a plancha off the top to the floor. The only negative is that it was too short, the same problem with every Liger match this year. New Japan is so reminiscent of WCW just before its fall that it isn't even funny. And it's worse because New Japan has always been a work rate promotion, and when the big draws can't do it, they're in big trouble. 2 3/4. 4. Naoya Ogawa beat Shinya Hashimoto via knockout in 1509. During the show they held an audience phone poll ending at the end of the Liger match with 294,828 thinking Hashimoto would win and 170,777 thinking Ogawa would win. I guess the majority were thinking pro wrestling was worked and New Japan would never be dumb enough to do a fake retirement angle. But they were wrong. This was also a Vale Tudo style of working. Ogawa decked Hashimoto early and kicked him hard to the face, and then threw punches from the mount. The place went nuts every time Hashimoto would make a comeback. At one point Hashimoto had the match won as he was pounding on Ogawa, who was staggering, when Murakami ran in and the distraction saved Ogawa. Iizuka went after Murakami. In the One Pro Wrestling spot, Hashimoto DDT'd Ogawa on the ramp. By this point Hashimoto had his trademark bloody nose and was looking tired. Ogawa did an STO, tried a second, and Hashimoto turned it into a DDT, delivered a really stiff elbow to the side of the head and got an armbar, but Ogawa made the ropes. Ogawa delivered 3 more STOs and a choke, but Hashimoto made the ropes. After another STO, Hashimoto laid down on the mat and couldn't beat the 10 count. It turned into a very dramatic match. 3 3/4 stars. Mexico. At the April 14th Arena Mexico show before 5,000 fans, Pero Aguayo won a hair versus hair match over Bestia Salvaje, a bloodbath on top. The match was said to have been horrible, as the idea at this stage of Aguayo having to work a long singles match isn't the best. The big angle after the match is that Mascara Anno 2000 broke a bottle on Aguayo's head. They did that exact angle years ago in AAA as a big show in Guadalajara, and the house show gates turned around immediately. In the semi, they continued the Villano Tercero turn as he teamed with Pia Roth Jr. and Fuerza Guerrera. Pia Roth Jr. used his gimmick to lay out both Atlantis and Villano. They ran a big angle at the April 14th Tijuana show between Rey Mysterio Sr. and Nicho El Millonario, Psicosis in WCW, to build up to a hair versus hair match soon. The card, which drew what was described as a big crowd but not a sellout, was headlined by the two in a dog collar match. Due to lots of outside interference from Halloween and Damien as well as a heel ref, it led to Nicho's younger brother, who accompanied him to ringside, stopping Rey Sr. as he was about to touch the 4th corner. Rey Sr. gave the little brother the dreaded Martinete tombstone piledriver, which is sold as the ultimate devastating move in Mexico, and he was stretchered out. Nicho made a comeback, stacked up 2 tables outside the ring and put Rey Sr. in between them. When he made the jump, Rey Sr. got away and he went through both tables and Rey touched all 4 corners to win. The athletic commissioner then reversed the decision because the ref was celebrating with Rey Sr., and they took off his ref shirt to reveal a Rey Mysterio shirt underneath. The commission demanded a hair versus hair rematch on May 12th, saying it was in the contract for the April 14th match that if Nicho won, they'd do a hair match. Rey refused, claiming, as an angle, he already had a booking in Acapulco and that he wouldn't put up his hair in the auditorio, saying he'd only do it in Arena Mexico, in Los Angeles or at the Plaza de Toros in Tijuana, an outdoor bullfighting arena. The promotion has announced a press conference for this week, probably to announce they are going outdoors as the blow-off hair match for the feud. Blue Panther beat El Hijo del Santo to win the WWA welterweight title on April 10th in Monterrey. They had a huge lineup that night featuring a one-night tag team tournament with tons of wrestlers brought in from Arena Mexico, coming down to La Parca, WCW, and Antifaz del Norte, who formerly worked for ECW, beating Simbito and Pia Roth Jr. in the finals. A rematch with Atlantis vs. Villano Tercero headlines April 20th in Tijuana, which will be held at the Jaya Frontón instead of the Auditorio plus Pero Aguayo. Didn't he already do his retirement match in Tijuana months ago? And Tarzan Boy and Brazo de Plata vs. Villanos 4 and 5 and Pia Roth Jr. Tarzan Boy retained the NWA light heavyweight title beating El Satanico on April 13th in Cuernavaca. Brazo de Oro Jr. 17 and Brazo de Plata Jr. 18, sons of their namesakes, which would make them first cousins, will be debuting shortly as a tag team. All Japan. Besides the Carnival finals, also on the April 15th Budokan Hall show saw Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taue beat Steve Williams and Johnny Smith in 6:01 when Kawada pinned Smith after a powerbomb. They had a battle of regular tag team partners with Mitsuharu Misawa pinning Yoshinari Ogawa in 13-21 after a Tiger Driver. Johnny Ace and Mike Barton beat Jun Akiyama and Manukia Mossman in a battle of regular tag teams when Barton pinned Mossman, and they also had the All-Asian Tag Team Champions, Tomohiro Honda and Masao Inoue have a singles match against each other that Honda won in 11:04 with a German suplex. New Japan. New Japan announced the complete lineup for its May 5th Fukuoka Dome card, and it's terribly weak. The main event will be an IWGP Tag Team title match with Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi defending against Naoya Ogawa and Kazunari Murakami. Ogawa suffered a dislocated shoulder in his April 7th match with Shinya Hashimoto but will be doing the show against doctor's orders because without him, they simply have no main event. They are doing an angle where Ogawa claims that he's injured and that Hashimoto should replace him teaming with Murakami, which creates some interest since Murakami did an angle last month attacking Hashimoto in the parking lot before the Rikitozen Memorial Show at the Yokohama Arena. Nagata and Nakanishi announced that they would face Hashimoto and Murakami, but the match itself has yet to be announced. The feeling is that if Ogawa isn't wrestling on the show, it's going to be a very difficult sell, and even with him it's a hard sell. The New Japan guys to hype the angle are saying Ogawa shouldn't pull out since he almost never wrestles to begin with. There is also a lot of talk of Ogawa vacating the NWA title, which he wore to the ring at the Tokyo Dome and came out to the traditional NWA World Champion music that Harley Race and Ric Flair used to come to the ring in during the heyday of the old NWA title when it was the #1 belt in the world. Also Kensuke Sasaki, who will come out with face paint in his old Power Warrior gimmick, defends the IWGP Heavyweight title against Great Muta, in what is also billed as an interpromotional match, Tatsumi Fujinami's opponent in the beginning of his retirement tour, since there was no reaction whatsoever to last week's announcement about bringing one of his early 80s rivals in, will be Masahiro Chono. Other matches have the New Japan debut of Crazy Max from Toriuman, Sumo Dandy Fuji and Suwa and Shima, teaming with Jushin Liger against Kendo Kashin and El Samurai and Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Koji Kanemoto, Akira vs Shinjiro Otani, Shiro Koshinaka and Junji Hirata and Tadao Yasuda vs Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara, Takashi Iizuka vs Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Satoshi Kojima vs Yutaka Yoshi, and the opener will be the finals of the Young Lions tournament which takes place on the current tour. New Japan ran annual events at the Fukuoka Dome, which holds about 68,000 in early May, from 1993 through 1995. Even with lineups far stronger than this one and during a period that the New Japan promotion was far hotter than it is now, they never came close to filling the building. After the 1995 show, which included Keiji Muto's IWGP title win over Shinya Hashimoto plus Antonio Inoki and Koji Kiao vs Genichiro Tenryu and Riki Choshu, Ric Flair vs Hiroshi Terry Funk's New Japan debut, Steiners vs Road Warrior Hawk and Scott Norton, Sasaki vs Tenzan, Koji Kanemoto vs Sabu for the IWGP Junior title, Chris Benoit vs 2 Cold Scorpio and more only drew 48,000 fans with more paper involved than you would hope for with such a lineup. They didn't come back again until November 2, 1997. Once again, they drew 48,000 fans, and this was with even more paper than the previous show. The lineup wasn't quite as strong as in 1995, but it was still much stronger than this current lineup. The show had Hashimoto and Ogawa in martial arts matches as well as Don Fry having won, which at that point was still a novelty. It also had Jushin Liger forming a tag team with Satoru Sayama, the two all-time Japanese junior heavyweight legends, a main event of Muto and Chono defending the IWGP tag titles against Fujinami and Tenryu, and even a junior title match with Otani defending against Benoit. New tour opened on April 14 in Kisenuma, which is the show Fukuda suffered his fatal injury on. In the main event, Yoshi got the highest profile win of his career teaming with Nagata and Nakanishi and Sasaki to beat Team 2000 of Saito and Jay and Tenzan and Chono when Yoshi made Saito submit to a Canadian backbreaker. On April 18, New Japan ran a show in Kiryu, near Yoshi's home city of Maebashi, drawing a sellout 1,800, and he got another main event win in an 8-man tag of New Japan vs Team 2000 making Saito submit, and Yoshi got a huge response on the show. This is a secret story from Texas from about a week back. A New Japan pro wrestler secretly did 2 legitimate shoot fights that weren't even allowed to be videotaped. He was called Saito, and from the description given to me, it sounded like Hiro Saito. He won both, but was said to have not looked impressive, and he nearly got guillotined by a much smaller low-level fighter. WCW wrestlers Chuck Palumbo and Rick Cornell are on the current tour. The next fairly big show on the current tour is April 25th in Hiroshima Sun Plaza Arena with a New Japan vs. Team 2000 elimination match on top with Liger and Yoshi and Nagata and Nakanishi and Sasaki vs. Super J and Akira and Chono and Tenzan and Kojima. New Japan is releasing an all-star video game on Sony PlayStation. Isn't out yet, as the ad states coming soon, and what's interesting is that in the TV commercial for the game, which allows you to pit wrestlers from the past against the current stars, they push the characters for Rikidozen, actually the most pushed character in the game, Inoki, Fujinami, Tsuruta and Choshu, harder than the current stars like Muto, Chono, Hashimoto, Sasaki, and Liger. It's in its own way the best commercial for a wrestling video game I've ever seen. The Rock commercial is funnier, so I'm not comparing the two. Other Japan notes. Satoru Sayama claimed that there would be a joint show with Dream Stage Entertainment and his own Seikendo promotion on June 11th at the Yokohama Arena, headlined by Masaaki Sadake. Rings will be running a May 20th show in Russia, which will include the return of Masayuki Naruse, who has been out of action since August due to injuries, as he faces Ilyakine Mikhail. The April 20th show in Tokyo has had 2 changes as Volkan didn't come for his first actual shoot match in rings, so Boris Giliaskov, a very good wrestler, faces Extreme Challenge heavyweight champ Bobby Hoffman. Hiromitsu Kanehara has a right leg injury, so his opponent, Renato Babalu, faces Travis Fulton from the US, who has had more than 100 legitimate MMA matches over the past few years. There are some rule changes starting with this show. In 2-round fights, the first round will be 10 minutes and the second round 5 minutes. If one judge rules a guy a winner and the other 2 vote draw, it'll be ruled a majority draw, just like in boxing. At the King of Kings, because it was a tournament and someone had to advance and they couldn't have draws, they'd advance someone on one judge's call. For title matches, just as the Kiyoshi Tamura vs. Gilbert Yvel match, the first round will be 15 minutes with the second round 5 minutes. FMW show on May 5th at Tokyo Komazawa Olympic Park Gym has Riki Fuji vs. Crazy Boy, Yoshinori Sasaki and Hideki Hasaka vs. Balls Mahoney and a mystery partner, a mixed match with Kaori Nakayama and Kyoko Inoue, women, and Chocoball Mukai vs. Yuka Nakamura and Emi Motokawa, women. And Azusa Kudo, a Goldust-like character, Kentaro Kanemura vs. Ryuji Yamakawa for the Woo Hardcore title, Geto and Jado and Koji Nakagawa vs. Willie Takayama and Willie Williams and Tarek Pasca, Masato Tanaka and a mystery partner against Mr. Ganasuke and H, and headline by Tetsuhiro Kuroda defending the Woo title against Koto Fuyuki in Fuyuki's retirement match. But if Fuyuki wins, then he doesn't have to retire. This was the show where originally they were going to do an ECW title switch with Tanaka and Mike Awesome. They are doing an angle where FMW President Shoichi Arai said that after May 5th, if anyone doesn't like working for the entertainment-style FMW, which largely tries to copy American gimmicks with little box office success, they can leave. They may be cutting some wrestlers as the company is losing money. The original booking plan for Awesome was for him to defend the ECW title 5 or 6 times on the tour with matches against Mr. Ganasuke on April 25th, Kentaro Kanemura on April 28th, Jado on April 30th, Geto on May 1st, and an American wrestler on May 3rd. Here and there. Jeff Peterson, 18, who wrestles up and down the East Coast, based in the Tampa area, was in intensive care over the weekend with both a cancerous growth between his lung and heart and an anxiety attack, and is undergoing chemotherapy. Peterson is the nephew of East Coast Wrestling Association promoter Jim Kettner, and was one of the top indie workers in the country, including a participant in Kettner's recent Super 8 tournament. The movie Man on the Moon about Andy Kaufman, featuring a lot of wrestling-related segments and some footage, will be released on home video on May 30th, while Beyond the Mat is scheduled for an August 15th CD and home video release featuring new footage being added to the movie. The reports of a September release are incorrect. Yet another former pro wrestler is going into politics. Russ Francis, who was much better known as an NFL star with the New England Patriots and San Francisco 49ers in the 70s and 80s, is running for the U.S. House of Representatives as a Republican in his home state of Hawaii. Francis is running against a favored Democratic incumbent, Patsy Mink. Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson won the NWA Tag Team titles, making the 8th time they've done so for those keeping track, beating Stephen Dunn and Jackie Fulton, who wrestles with All Japan under his real name, George Hines, on April 12th at Camp Carroll in Korea on the NWA Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling Air Force Base Tour billed as World Wrestling Alliance shows. Dunn and Reno Riggins had won the title just a few days earlier on the same tour over Drake Dawson and Curtis Thompson. With Riggins injured, they put Hines, who had been working the tour as his longtime masked gimmick of the American Eagle, in his spot for the title switch. Riggins has since left the tour due to an illness to his father. The next night at Kusan Air Force Base, Rock and Roll Express lost a non-title match to the Bushwhackers. Mike Rapata, Colorado Kid, was involved in an auto accident near Gallup, New Mexico over the weekend. His cousin, Alyssa Alabolos, fell asleep while driving and the car rolled several times. He was shaken up, but is expected to return to Nashville this week. XPW ran its debut show at the Los Angeles Sports Arena on April 15 before an estimated 1,200 fans for what was advertised as a Condito vs. Douglas main event. Douglas did an interview ripping on WWF, WCW and Flair. The fans were chanting "You sold out" at him because he'd signed with WCW. Douglas then called company owner Rob Black's wife a porno whore and slapped her, and when Black came out, Douglas hit him with a chain. This led to an angle where they pretended another office guy had taken over. The match turned into a three-way when Sabu did a surprise run-in. Douglas actually left the ring and was mainly a spectator when they started doing the tables and stuff, with Condito pinning Sabu to keep the title. The biggest bump was by a wrestler named Messiah, who fell from the top of the cage to the floor. Axel Rotten and John Cronus were the only U.S. name wrestlers on the show, but they also brought in Halloween, Damien, El Salcero and Mosco de la Merced from Mexico. The TV show, announced as being on small KJLA, has yet to air, and apparently the station isn't going to run the shows due to content, which says something since the station carries ECW. XPW is still on America One Saturday nights at 11 p.m. They will run April 28th in Bakersfield and April 29th in Ventura with Condito vs. Sabu on top, plus Public Enemy will appear. Where Are They Now department? Paul Centopani, who wrestled as Paul Roma, now retired from wrestling and living in Milford, Connecticut, along with his girlfriend Linda Ritchie, had an article written on them in the New Haven Register about their newly designed orthopedic-friendly school children's backpacks. As many know, the popular backpacks have in recent years been linked to back problems to people who have had years of use, so they've come up with a design that has received favorable endorsements from several chiropractors and pediatricians under the name Manimal Wear. The back-friendly packs will be available through the Spiegel catalog as well as at Kids R Us and Yale Co-op for the back-to-school season in August and September. Leo Del Santo made a rare East Coast appearance working for the promotion in South Plainfield, New Jersey and Kenilworth, New Jersey. Mike Quackenbush, who retired about a month ago, came back to work a tag match with Santo and a singles match for FWA in Palo Alto, Pennsylvania. The group will be running 4 shows in October in the New Jersey and Pennsylvania area with Mil Mascaras, Santo, Blue Panther, Apollo Dantes and Dr. Wagner Jr. Insane Clown Posse's Juggalo Championship Wrestling ran its first tour date on April 14th in Denver at the Fillmore Auditorium before an estimated 2,000 fans at $25 apiece, although many were comps. It was described as a very young crowd, many thinking they were coming to see a concert as opposed to wrestling. There were very young kids there, but no matter. The ring girl came out wearing a thong and t-shirt for the opener. Later just a thong. For the main event, no thong. Actually, it's not as great as it sounded because the guys were chanting for her to put her clothes back on. In one match they asked the fans to throw in $1 bills. The two guys then proceeded to staple the bills onto each other. Add Vampiro to the list of those doing the Brian Pillman Memorial Show on May 25th in Cincinnati. MMA. After the Tokyo Dome show, Pride will be running a June 4th show at Nagoya Rainbow Hall. April 30th Pancrase pay-per-view at Yokohama Bunka Gym is headlined by Semishield defending his King of Pancrase title against Yoshiki Takahashi, plus Shoni Carter vs. Kyuma Kunyoku and the return of Jason DeLucia after a broken leg against Bob Staines. Prelim matches are Asami Shibuya vs. Hiroshi Oda, Minoru Suzuki vs. Sean Dougherty, Hikaru Sato vs. Michael Sajin Kwok, Takaku Fuke vs. Daisuke Watanabe and Kosei Kubota vs. Massive Ichi. A rare Pancrase vs. Rings match is being attempted to be put together on June 4th in Amsterdam, Holland, with Yoshihisa Yamamoto vs. Schultz. Rumina Sato, Shudo's top drawing card, made a rare U.S. appearance headlining the April 15th Future Brawl show in Honolulu, beating Eve Edwards with a choke in 18 seconds while Edwards was still standing. 2 former USWF wrestlers, Steve Nelson's old Amarillo promotion, did the show, with Eric Davila losing to highly rated Matt Hughes and Eric Payne being upset by Stephen Pauling. Eric Paulson, who has fought in Shudo and EFC, scored a unanimous decision over Ronald Chun in the semifinal. Former Pancrase fighter Vernon White knocked out Todd Medina in the first round of the King of the Cage 3 on April 15th, in San Jacinto, California. That show was more noteworthy based on who was in attendance at the show, including Pam Anderson, Mark Kerr, Boss Rutan, Ken Shamrock, Frank Shamrock, Don Wilson, and Alexander Otska. Ken and Otska did a pro wrestling angle, since both are pro wrestlers, with Otska calling Shamrock an old man and Shamrock taking off his jacket, probably for Japanese TV hype. They had a photo shoot on April 17th at Nobuhiko Takada's dojo, where Antonio Inoki was teaching different submissions like the Wakigatame to Kazushi Sakuraba and Kazuyuki Fujita for their May 1st Tokyo Dome matches in the tournament. Inoki also said that he would like Shinya Hashimoto, who is, wink, retired as a pro wrestler, to come back as a mixed martial arts fighter. In an angle to hype ticket sales for the Dome show, Pride announced they wanted Hashimoto at ringside for the show and wanted him to fight for them now that he's retired as a pro wrestler. K1 ran its United Kingdom Grand Prix on April 16th in Birmingham, England, won by Matt Skelton, who beat Rick Nicholson in the finals of an 8-man tournament. Skelton will be now in the World Grand Prix, which starts on June 30th at Nagoya Rainbow Hall. He'll also face Mike Bernardo on May 28th in Sapporo on a show with a double headliner, the other being Jan Norkia facing Ernesto Hoost. K1 has a show on April 23rd at the Osaka Dome, and Musashi had to pull out of the show due to broken leg. They also have a show on June 3rd in Zurich, Switzerland, headlined by Andy Hug vs. Mirko Filipovic, in what is being billed as Hug's final match ever in Switzerland, his home country. Yes, another one of those. ECW. This week's TNN tapings took place on April 16th in St. Charles, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis, before about 2,500 fans. In the TNN Open, the Impact players and Dawn Marie talked about not being afraid of any woman in the business. Raven and Francine came out and it turned into a tag title match, with Raven teaming with Whipwreck, who was already out there lighting something at ringside on fire, ending when Credible pinned Whipwreck with his spinning tombstone. Credible only worked the TV tapings because his wife just gave birth to a boy last week. They appeared to set up C.W. Anderson vs. Angel, but Cyrus came out and talked both into leaving the ring. Cyrus called out Scotty Anton, formerly Scotty Riggs, making homosexual allusions about his friendship with Van Dam and making comments about him not being cleared to wrestle for ECW. Rhino came out and they had something of a match, which saw Rhino spear both Anton and the ref through a table before Van Dam hit the ring for a pull-apart. The main event was one of the bloodier matches they've had in a long time and said to be among the best brawls the company has put on. It started as a bull rope match with Corino vs. Dreamer, but ended up as an 8-man with Rhino in victory and Tao on Corino's side and New Jack and Sandman and Dusty Rhodes on the other side, ending when Jack pinned Corino and the Faces, all drinking beer and throwing foreign objects to the crowd. The legal problems continue between Paul Heyman and Sabu. Heyman successfully blocked Sabu from working the Insane Clown Posse's Juggalo Championship correct spelling wrestling tour, where he was scheduled to be the headline attraction. Extreme Pro Wrestling announced for the show on April 15th at the Los Angeles Sports Arena that Heyman's legal maneuverings had blocked Sabu from appearing on the show the day before, except they used him anyway as an unannounced surprise as he showed up during the Condito vs. Douglas XPW title match, which turned into a three-way, which Condito retained, pinning Sabu. The word given to us is that, wink, wink, Sabu was able to do the show because he wasn't getting paid. They are clearly trying to force Heyman's hand, since Heyman had told so many people he was able to block Sabu from working in the US because of Sabu's contract breach. TNN show on April 14th was largely taped in Buffalo the previous week, except for the brief cut-in from Indianapolis the night before to show the title change. They pushed the idea that Taz had shocked the world in Indianapolis, referring to him under his WWF gimmicks with the 2 Z's and the Human Wrecking Machine as opposed to Suplex Machine, his ECW moniker, in 2 insets, without saying it was a title change. They aired basically only the piledriver finish of a Rhino win over Cash. Jazz went to see the Devil, Vandenberg, who asked her for sex. She told him to go to church. The segment ended with the dressing room floor on fire and Devil and Whipwreck laughing hysterically. It was a very weird segment. Storm and Credible retained the tag titles, beating Chetty and Nova in 9:15 in a good, almost Japanese-style match. Good innovative spots. The negative was that the crowd didn't buy Chetty and Nova as having a chance to win the belts, so their near falls didn't pop the crowd. They did build to a big pop when Chetty hip-tossed Credible through a table and went for a pin, but Dawn Marie saved the titles. Jazz made the save. The finish came quickly thereafter, with Credible hitting Chetty with a title belt and Storm pinning him. The footage from Indianapolis aired next. Next was the TV title switch in a 3-way, with Tao winning over Crazy and Guido. Tao was the total star of this match, which was their typical very good match. It is weird to say this, But it's almost a big risk today running a TV show with a match that goes 13:56 and another as long as the tag title match. Crazy juiced heavy early. Guido then juiced heavy, actually juicing before Tao dropkicked a table into his forehead. Tao bladed himself under the ring and then Guido slammed his head into Sal E. Graziano's chair. Tao used a Goria special and in that position spun him around like a whirlybird. Tao set up a table with Crazy on it and Guido under it. He did a double foot stomp off the top rope, but Crazy moved, so he went through the table onto Guido and both guys pinned Guido. Corino and Victory came out at this point to underdog Crazy. Tao used a crowbar and dug it into Crazy's forehead. He then blew mist at the ref, so there was no ref as Crazy did a top rope quebrada. Rhino interfered spearing Crazy and pile drove him off the apron through a table, totally protecting him into process and Tao got the pin. Cyrus came out doing a Ric Flair out of control promo. Sandman came out for the save and this time got a lot of offense in, including caning the hell out of Rhino. When he threatened Cyrus, Tao blew the mist in his eyes and gave Sandman one of his wicked kicks. Rhino then speared ref HC Locke, who they are now calling the Extreme Official, Babyface Ref, and Sandman both threw two tables set up vertically on the turnbuckle. Why does Cyrus have a headset mic and a hand mic? Scotty Riggs, called Scott Anton, real name Scott Antal, and Rob Van Dam came out with Van Dam cleaning house on all the riff-raff until he squared off with Rhino, and the show ended before they touched. Storm posted on his website a message actually repeating a viewpoint the vast majority of those we've heard from, including more than one wrestler in the company, has espoused about the entire nature of the title change with outside interference and putting it on Taz. He got so much heat that he took it down. Storm, despite rumors to the contrary, is going to be sitting down this week trying to finalize a contract extension with ECW. The ECW arena on April 22nd is already sold out, making it the earliest sellout in company history for the building. The show was basically sold out before any of the awesome situation got out, so the idea that Taz is going to defend the title can't be fairly given as a reason. Vic Grimes missed the weekend because he got married. Ikuto Hidaka is expected back for the summer. Masato Tanaka should start back this coming week. Kentaro Kanemura was also scheduled to return this week, but that fell through at the last minute. There have been no further negotiations toward bringing in some of the Toryuman wrestlers. WCW. Nitro on April 17th in Rockford, Illinois drew 3,177 paid and 1,168 comps for a $98,990 house. The show opened with a celebration with Russo, who was better on TV this week, and all the new champs with confetti and balloons. It came off like an NWO party rerun. Russo and Jarrett cut a promo on Jim Ross, which probably served to confuse 95% of the audience and made them come off as Bush Leagues to most of the remaining 5%, especially when the ratings came out the next day. If Jarrett holding a belt given to him because his best friend in the company is writing the scripts want to rub it in Ross' face for losing him, he should wait until after the ratings gap closes to 1 point or he's the one who headlines a pay-per-view that does a 1.0 buy rate, because until that time he's proven nothing as a headliner. Jarrett challenged DDP to a rematch at Slamboree on May 7th in Kansas City at Kemper Arena in the three-tier cage that was in Ready to Rumble. Bischoff and Kimberly came out. Kimberly even called DDP DD me. Bruce Mitchell should charge a commission. Kimberly claimed she had to keep turning down opportunities because DDP was trying to keep her down. Page showed up and security told him he wasn't allowed in. Page beat them all up and came in anyway. As he was going to the ring, he passed by Stasiak and Hennig, who, seriously, were backstage talking over their match. Page ran in the ring but was attacked 5-on-1. However, the helmeted Riot Squad at ringside turned out to be the Millionaires Club to even the score, which came off as a WWF rerun. Bischoff and Russo then yelled at Booker and guys like Morris, Flynn, Chavo Jr. and Bigelow for not helping out backstage. Then the security quit. Bischoff then picked up a phone that never rang and it was Hogan's voice threatening him. Stasiak beat Hennig in 3:48 with a spin-around slam type of move they called the Perfect Plex. Stasiak is now the Perfect One as the non-charismatic version of Hennig's Mr. Perfect character. Hennig threw water all over Madden, who didn't know it was coming, so he's clearly the WCW Howard Finkel. There was a ref bump in this match, since I think there can't be a match on Nitro without one. Miss Hancock came out, I guess to show she's still around. Stasiak hit Hennig with a foreign object before doing his finish. With security gone, they had police officers guarding the back to keep Stone Cold Hulk Hogan from coming in. They were ready to pull their guns, but Hogan gave them a dirty look and they all backed off and let him in. I'm just glad I don't live in Rockford. Hogan went to the ring to beat up Stasiak. Hogan then did an interview and challenged anyone to come out. It was probably his best promo in a long time, and he is still the smartest man in wrestling, and the show wasn't even half over yet. Although he nearly died 1 week ago and was bandaged up 1 day ago, he was 100% selling nothing tonight. He challenged Kidman, who was shown on the video wall challenging Hogan to fight him in the back. Hogan ran off. Hogan, like Nash, should never be put in a position that requires immediate intensity because he can't run, and he exposes he's no longer athletic when put in that position and ruins the fantasy. Funk beat Wall to keep the hardcore title in 4:57. They traded chair shots. Funk actually did an Orihara moonsault off the top rope to the floor, and Wall didn't catch him right, and he made a scary landing. But no matter how bad he really hurt, he got up, took a pile driver on the table, and even got his head slammed several times on the cage door, and it took a bunch of more chair shots. The match ended when a whole bunch of tables fell from the sky on Wall and Funk pinned him. Funk was probably hurting terribly the next day from the match, but it was easily the best match of Wall's life. Adams and Clark, called Team Chronic, demanded a title shot from Russo. Russo admitted he promised them a shot, but told him he didn't promise when, and to be patient. They beat up the Harris twins backstage, and then beat up the Mamalukes in the ring. They physically looked like monsters. They used their double choke slam finisher on both Vito and Johnny and threw them out of the ring. Vampiro did an interview. The best thing to say about the interview is it was a great light show. Sting then came down from the ceiling and destroyed Vampiro, killing him with a ton of bat shots and the Scorpion Death Drop. There was a lot of talk the next day about him coming from the ceiling. The NBA banned all mascots or anyone at their games from coming from the ceiling immediately after Owen Hart died out of respect to Hart, who didn't even play their sport, a ban that has not been rescinded, but to be the slightest bit surprised would be to think WCW has the same class as the NBA. For a pro wrestling company to do this, for nothing more than a pop, whether it's dangerous or not, and Sting was clearly dropped too fast, in front of wrestling fans, at least some of whom watch the Over the Edge pay-per-view and have bad memories of it, let alone with his brother in the same state, let alone the same building, is terribly insensitive. I just hope they have enough class not to duplicate this when they run Kansas City. DDP no contest awesome. They were having a good match when Mark Madden said how in the new WCW they are going to have winners and losers and the refs aren't going to be calling DQs. Literally seconds later, Billy Silverman called the DDQ. Kanyon ran in when Page was out of the ring, which truly makes Page look strong for his world title match on the pay-per-view, and Awesome German suplexed Kanyon. Nash came in from behind and powerbombed Awesome through a table, and came way too close to impaling him while doing the move. Abbott came out and went after Bruce MacArthur, who in real life is one of Ric Flair's best friends, I think dating back more than 30 years. MacArthur, whose family owns the United Center and the Blackhawks, was sitting with NHL tough guy Bob Probert. Abbott grabbed MacArthur, and before he could do much, Probert hit the ring. They had a quick pull apart and nothing happened far too quickly, as if booked right and pushed hard. At least they could have made Sports Center. Luger and C. Douglas in 3:52. The Stips were if Russo interfered, then Luger and Flair would get the tag belts. Bagwell came out, but a fan dressed as Sting, who of course was Flair, destroyed Douglas. Hogan found Kidman and beat him up with one hand tied behind his back. He then chased Bischoff, who was about to drive off in the Hummer, but it wouldn't start. He left the keys behind and ran away. So Hogan started it immediately using his supernatural powers and drove into the garbage bin Kidman was trapped in, destroying it. Kidman was left on a stretcher dead. Thankfully, if he's got Hogan's recuperative powers, and being that he's 23 years younger and takes better bumps, he should have them, he should be fine by next week's Nitro. Main event, which was pushed the whole show as a mystery non-millionaire against Jarrett, who Jarrett was clearly afraid of and wanted Russo to talk out of the match, but Russo couldn't. As a shoot, there was debate between different factions regarding the hype during the show. The general feeling was to announce Steiner, but Russo thought keeping it a surprise would be better for ratings. The 2.1 made Russo look bad, but the truth is if they had announced Steiner, it probably wouldn't have made much difference. Match wasn't any good. Just as Madden talked about how they don't do DQs after doing them in the previous two matches, Booker ran in and kicked Steiner while he had Jarrett just about beat for the DQ in 3:28. The fans clearly hated this. To send them home happy, Hogan was still chasing Bischoff and got him in the ring. Hart then showed up with a chair and swung it just as the show went off the air. I guess we have to wait until April 24th to find out who he hit with the chair, but he did hit Hogan with it live. Actually, it was a pretty good cliffhanger ending, but it won't help ratings since nobody saw it. The show was never boring, but the show was never that good and the in-ring product left a lot to be desired. Thunder taped on April 11th in Colorado Springs, Colorado was the second straight good show, one under the all-time company record for the past 18 months. Tony Schiavone joined Mike Tenay and Bobby Heenan on the team. Who would have ever thought the announcing changes would result in more Schiavone? David Arquette was there and they pretty well had telegraphed him doing an angle at Nitro. They've now got the new blood team focused on being Kidman, Booker, Miller, Vampiro, Scott Steiner, Douglas, and Wall. I know Steiner is 38 and Douglas is 37 and both are years past their prime due to so many injuries, but this is wrestling. Bischoff announced Kimberly versus Medusa, which brought out Paige. Paige was headed to the ring when Bigelow jumped him and everyone joined in pounding on him. Crowbar and LaRue and Moore beat Candido and Guerrera and Artist in 6:30. This was a fast-paced, very entertaining match that made not a lick of sense. They had David Flair, Helms, Paisley and Daphne at ringside as if the 6 guys in the ring weren't providing enough action. Everyone did dives early, including Moore doing a top rope Asai moonsault to the floor. Daphne did a Frankensteiner off the top on Helms and seemed really happy she pulled it off. Then the Guerrera team kept having the match won, but our partner would break up the pin and cost his own team the match. This actually happened time after time. The announcers clearly weren't clued in, because nobody said a word nor were telling the story of the match, and sometimes when a partner made the save it was presented as if it was a member of the opposing team. Finally they came up with the explanation that the wrestlers are trying so hard to impress Russo and Bischoff that, I guess, they are trying to make sure their team doesn't win. I guess it makes sense now that I think about it. They wanted to make sure they did the job so they get over with the bosses. Artist must have impressed them since he hit his DDT on Candido. It was clear nobody could even keep track, or by this point even cared, who was on what team. Crowbar pinned Candido after a gourdbuster that was set up by Artist, costing his team the match. Nobody actually said this or got it over, however. Bischoff told Harlem Heat 2000 to beat up Sid. Hennig attacked Stasiak, who was in makeup. They are calling Stasiak the perfect one. As many have noted, a more apt retro name based on his debut would have been Shockmaster 2000. Sid wrestled all 3 members of Heat in a no DQ match. This was among the most awful matches you'll ever see. They missed more moves in this match than in a usual month of Thunder, and that's not an exaggeration. There was a good deal of heat anyway because of the 3-on-1 for so long. Finally Booker made the save and cleaned house, leading to Sid pinning Ray after a power bomb in 2:43. See, Booker hates his brother more than he hates the millionaires that were holding him down for so long. Wall hit Sid with a chair and then Bischoff got mad at Booker for helping Sid, thus there is dissension in the NB ranks. Bischoff then said Sid was DQ'd, in a no DQ mock, due to outside interference, and thus Sid was eliminated from the US title tournament on the pay-per-view. Luger beat Douglas in 3:44 with the rack due to help from Flair after a ref bump. Another bad match. Jimmy Hart was in the ring crying about how Hogan made Bischoff and how Bischoff turned his back and demanded Bischoff to come out. Kidman came out instead, and Hart called him the flea market champion. Kidman, beat him up and spray painted him. They did a Royal Rumble rules match, although they called it something else, with all the US title contenders. Booker and Wall stated, and it wasn't even bad. Miller came in. Wall choke slammed Booker through the table and both were counted out. Not sure why Wall just didn't get back in the ring, but they had to eliminate him, and logic is hardly relevant to today's wrestling. Steiner and Kidman came in. Miller was pinned and then Steiner pinned Kidman, who actually got 0 offense in against Steiner when they locked up. Vampiro was the last guy in, but before anything happened, Sting gave Vampiro the SDD and Steiner put Vampiro in the recliner in 5:31. Medusa versus Kimberly barely happened. Paige came out almost immediately and Medusa started kicking him, so he gave her the diamond cutter for a DQ in 1:25. Kimberly was then mad at Paige since he cost her the match. In a 3-way hardcore match to determine the 2 participants in the hardcore title match on the pay-per-view, somehow Smiley and Funk won when Smiley pinned Funk. The wrestling was bad, but they did enough stunts that it was good TV. Morris came off the stage through a table that he only caught the corner of. I was really scared watching this because Morris has had so many concussions in his career, and every time he takes a chair to the head he's taking a risk he really shouldn't be put in the position of taking. Mang and Knobs ended up in the concourse of the arena. Mang speared a life-size poster of Goldberg, which was funny. Mang then used the poster to block Knobs, spraying him with a fire extinguisher. Mang then threw Knobs off a 30-foot balcony. I presume Knobs is either dead, or landed in Lake Michigan. Funk whipped Finlay through a table. The announcers acted as if Knobs was gravely injured, and were so concerned that a moment later they forgot about it and never brought it up again. Rhodes came out and destroyed Funk dead, so Smiley, seeing Funk was out, and I guess the fact they were partners to begin with was irrelevant, pinned him at 7-13. Logically, the hardcore title was prestigious and you could pin your own partner to get both of you into the title match. Shouldn't everyone have raced from the opening bell to lie down and let their partner pin them before the other two teams did the same thing? Now at this point in the show live, they had a match with Sting against three Villanos, one of which was Jarrett. However, in the production blunder of the year, they skipped that match and came back from the commercial showing the replay of the finish where Jarrett hit Sting with a guitar and Page saved Sting, so Sting won the match to get into the US title tournament. Ric Flair beat Bagwell via DQ in 3:08 when Russo, dressed up in a Sting costume with a bat, at ringside next to David Arquette, hit the ring and beat up Flair with the bat. Douglas came out to help until Luger tried to make the save, but Bagwell hit Luger with the bat. Never mind, they now let fans at ringside bring fake baseball bats. Flair once again wrestled in clothes. They actually had a reason for it again. They should just have Russo and Bischoff make a ruling on TV that Flair is fired if he ever wears wrestling trunks, since it makes as much sense as anything and it all accomplishes the desired purpose. You've got to give them tons of credit, though. They've got Flair as a babyface and wrestling with a shirt. Then they showed the Sting match, complete with Russo back at ringside in the Sting costume. Sting had to pin all three. What was really funny is seeing the two Villanos from Mexico and Jarrett together, that Jarrett was actually tiny next to the Mexican cruiserweights, or considered too small to be taken seriously. Sting pinned both of them. Jarrett then crashed the guitar on Sting and unmasked. Page ran in and hit Jarrett with a diamond cutter, but Sting pinned him in 2:28. This probably would have been a good angle, except for the production screw-up. Finally DDP wrestled Bigelow and we had another ref bump. Page hit the diamond cutter and Bischoff came out, counted to 2 and stopped. Jarrett hit Page with a guitar shot. Arquette finally did his run-in with them, explaining that Arquette is now close friends with Page. Arquette took a hell of a bump over the top, but then, even though he looks to be about 150, Jarrett couldn't pick him up for a body slam because he mistimed his jump before he clumsily got dropped on the rail. Jarrett gave Arquette the stroke. Canyon, who I guess is now a millionaire and over 40, saved Page for a second until Bischoff hit him with a wheat chair shot and Kidman came out and spray-painted NB on Page. After the show went off the air, the faces all got to make a comeback, so they sent the people home happy. Ready to Rumble did $2,685,718 in its second weekend, so it's now at $9,093,168 after its first 10 days of release. It ranked number 10 for the weekend, but its per-screen average in 2,585 theaters of $1,019 is not good, nor is a 53% drop off its open. Beyond the Mat, which is only out in 26 theaters nationwide, did $9,990 for the weekend, so it's just about at the end of its run, grossing $1,945,267. Morale is said to be way up for the first time in a long time. The reason they did the angle getting Sid off the pay-per-view is because he's not supposed to be wrestling due to his shoulder injury. Add Mark Kerr to the list of shoot fighters on their way to WCW. Kerr was contacted by Bischoff and told they are going to have a group called Fight Club composed of Mark Coleman, Don Fry, Kerr, Rick Steiner, and Abbott. Kerr was told he'd be brought in after the concept is developed as a new monster rather than at first. Bill Goldberg was asked to appear on the April 10th Nitro show but only appeared at the house show because with only a handful of workouts in, felt he shouldn't be appearing on television wrestling until he looked like Goldberg. They had a team meeting before the April 10th Nitro and basically told everyone they need to pull together and be part of the same team. The basic feeling seemed to be that finally there was a boss in charge, as it was the first 2 television tapings where it was clear the inmates weren't running the asylum and there were very few changes made in the scripts as they were laid out for the first time in a year. There was a big difference backstage in that while everyone seemed to personally like Bill Bush, probably far more than Eric Bischoff, nobody respected him, and it was really clear he quickly got the tag that he could be run all over. Scott Hudson's father actually passed away early in the Nitro show on April 10th, while he was on the air. His mother and father were watching the show at their home in Tifton, Georgia. His father had several heart attacks in the early 90s but had gotten into much better condition and his health had been improved over the past 5 years. When they saw Abbott go to the announcer's desk, they both got very scared because it was obvious the angle was leading to an announcer getting beaten up. They were relieved when Abbott started spanking Madden. His father got up and took the garbage out and apparently while doing so suffered a heart attack and died. The Tijuana newspaper La Frontera ran another story on April 13th on the Damien and Halloween Cyclope lawsuit against WCW, saying that WCW has 180 days to respond to the suit. They are claiming to have been unjustly fired while both were injured and said they were working in a hostile environment where racist jokes were plentiful, even in the Atlanta office. They had Bischoff's secretary putting the racial joke on her computer where it was accidentally seen by several African American employees rears its ugly head again. WCW will start airing in Denmark in a few weeks, making it the first pro wrestling to air in that country in 5 years. Starrcade will be on December 17th at the MCI Center in Washington, D.C. Michael Landsberg of TSN's Off the Record is back in negotiations with WCW about doing a monthly 1-hour biography show involving WCW wrestlers for both the network in Canada and attempting to syndicate it in the United States. We have a report of someone purchasing a WCW Canyon doll and saw on their receipt that it's scanned in as a doll of Dennis Rodman. April 11th in Colorado Springs, Colorado for Thunder drew 3,118 paying $62,085. April 13th in Sioux Falls, South Dakota drew 1,664 paying $37,268. April 14th in Omaha drew 4,042 paying $90,408. April 15th in Peoria, Illinois drew 1,792 paying $42,480. Both Sioux Falls and Omaha largely saw the same show headlined by a 6-man with Sting and Luger and Flair losing to Bagwell, Vampiro in Sioux Falls, and Booker and Kidman when outside interference from Douglas caused Flair to get pinned. Reports from both shows indicated major improvements in atmosphere and work rate, including a much improved sound system. Omaha in particular had a very unruly crowd, but the show was a huge improvement over WCW house shows. WWF. The April 30th Backlash pay-per-view from the MCI Center in Washington, D.C. at this point has 8 matches booked. The main event is Triple H vs. Rock for the title with Vince in Triple H's corner, Austin in Rock's corner and Shane as referee.
Also it'll be Benoit vs. Jericho for the IC title, Edge and Christian vs. Road Dogg and X-Pac for the tag titles, Show vs. Angle, Dudley's vs. T&A, a 4-way elimination match for the Hardcore title with Saturn, Taz, Bob, and Crash, Guerrero vs. Rios for the European title, Malenko vs. Too Hotty for the light heavy title and Acolytes vs. Buchanan and Bossman.
On paper, it's one of the strongest lineups to date. The main event for the May 6th WWF Insurrection, that's how it's being spelled, pay-per-view from Earl's Court in London, England, UK only pay-per-view is being advertised as a 3-way with Triple H, Rock and Shane McMahon for the title. Keep in mind that as TV changes storylines, this lineup will probably change as well as the previous UK pay-per-view lineup was changing on a weekly basis. Benoit wants to bring Dynamite Kid to this show. Rest of the show is Benoit vs. Angle for the IC, Guerrero vs. Jericho for the European, Edge and Christian vs. Dudley's vs. Hardys for the tag titles, Malenko vs. Crash Holly for the light heavyweight, Cat vs. Terry in an arm wrestling match, Rikishi vs. Show, Acolytes vs. X-Pac and Dog, Saturn vs. Too Hotty and Kane vs. Bossman. There has been no officially announced figure for WrestleMania's pay-per-view. The latest estimates are more than 800,000 buys. There is no solid estimate on the percentage of whom bought $34.95 or $49.95 other than the company's pre-show estimate of 20% buying the 12-hour more expensive version is going to be surpassed. Raw on April 17th at Penn State University's Bryce Jordan Center in State College, Pennsylvania drew a sellout 11,611 paying $298,364 for an excellent show. The show opened with a tremendous TV match with Jericho pinning Triple H after a quebrada and a fast count by Earl Hebner, who was mad at Triple H in 8:37 to apparently win the WWF title, which drew a tremendous pop for what can be described as the dusty finish 2000. The Acolytes came out early as Jericho's protectors from a run-in. Jericho bled from the mouth. Ref Mike Chioda was bumped and Hebner ran in to take his place. Shane interfered but the Acolytes chased him away. After the match, Triple H and Shane grabbed Hebner and Chioda and brought them to the ring. Triple H asked Chioda after watching the replay if it was a fair count and Chioda told Earl he screwed Triple H. Triple H told Hebner to reverse his decision, but Hebner refused. Shane and Triple H threatened to beat up Hebner, who agreed to reverse his decision but only if they agreed that as long as he worked in the WWF, they would never touch him. Triple H then told Hebner to bring him the belt from the sawed-off midget, cleverly burying Jericho the first time after putting him over in a segment clearly more designed at putting over Triple H as a heel than getting Jericho over as a title contender. Jericho gave back the belt, and Triple H told Hebner to put the belt around his waist. Triple H then told Hebner he was fired, and since he no longer worked for the WWF, he and Shane destroyed Hebner and laid him out with a pedigree. This whole first hour was tremendous. Guerrero was studying with China for his GED. Guerrero was so totally overplaying the stereotypical Mexican high school dropout lowrider gimmick it was pretty racist, particularly his exaggerated speech pattern. Hardys beat Guerrero and Rios in 4:41 in a great match. Lita accidentally hit Guerrero with a moonsault block and Guerrero's positioning was perfect to take it. Matt then pinned him with the twist of fate. China blamed Rios and she and Guerrero put the boots to him after the match. Crash won a three-way for the hardcore title over Taz and Saturn, which turned into a four-way with Bob. Very stiff as they were killing each other with a cookie sheet. Not much heat, but the work was good. Crash pinned Saturn after Bob used his formerly known as the Holocaust but now simply his Wadata maneuver in 3:25. Linda came out for the interview to announce Austin in Rock's corner. Triple H, Shane and Stephanie came out. The announcement of Austin's name tore the roof off the place. But between Linda and Stephanie, there was some major bad acting in the segment. Stephanie was about to hit Linda, but she blocked her blow and counterpunched and Stephanie went down. Linda freaked out about slapping her daughter. Triple H went to pedigree Linda but Shane saved her. Stephanie got between Triple H and Shane and ended up slapping both of them. Maybe we'll end up with a three-way dance with those three. Rock came out and cut a promo, which, surprisingly, was his only appearance of the show. Snow and Blackman beat Dudleys in 1:30 when after Snow got the 3D test and Albert interfered and Test came off the top with an elbow on Devon and Snow pinned him. Bubba snatched Trish Stratus, but before he could molest her, she kissed him. He was smitten and went into his trance and she was saved. I'm not sure what message the WWF is sending to the new audience. It is bragging about being strong in the teenage girls with that message. Crowd booed this heavily because they wanted to see Stratus go through the table. Angle did several vignettes on the Penn State campus throughout the show preaching abstinence. The segments were very funny, but they should put someone like Snow, who doesn't have the upward potential Angle has, to play this Bob Backlund role. Backlund was hilarious and a heat-getting machine when he was in the early days of his heel role, but because of the gimmick, was a total failure as a draw when put on top years ago. The final segment ended with Show spoiling Angle's advice by throwing condoms everywhere. Too Hotty won the light heavyweight strap from Malenko in 4:41 when Malenko did a superplex off the top and Too Hotty caught him in a surprise inside cradle. The Dynamite Kid vs. Randy Savage Wrestling Classic pay-per-view finish. Another really good match. Show beat Benoit in the IC title match via DQ in 2:21 for a low blow. On a night where there were about 2,000 low blows between the two shows, that was a lame finish. After the match, Angle ran in and gave Show another low blow. Edge and Christian kept the tag titles beating Buchanan and Bossman via DQ in 4:43. Not much heat. The heels were DQ'd for no apparent reason other than shoving Teddy Long, and considering refs are knocked unconscious with impunity, that was the second straight weak finish. Didn't Edge and Christian turn heels like 3 weeks ago? Kane came out with a cast on his hand and choke slammed Buchanan. Main event saw Triple H and Dog and X-Pac over Acolytes and Jericho in 7:36. Another good match. Everyone except Jericho and Triple H brawled to the back. Bossman and Buchanan attacked the Acolytes. With just Triple H and Jericho in the ring, Triple H hit the pedigree for a clean pin. I defy anyone to give me a logical business explanation for that finish. Actually, the reason was immediately obvious, and that's that Hunter is the third smartest man in wrestling. If they wanted to give Triple H a pin because he sort of lost earlier and after all, the champ should be kept strong, they should have taken the pin on Bradshaw or Farouk rather than cut the legs off a guy who had seemingly just taken a big step and up until getting pinned seemed to have elevated himself into a position to being a viable challenger. April 18th tapings from a sold-out Core State Center in Philadelphia. They opened the show pushing the Gary Albright tribute show in Allentown the next night. Venus beat Henry with a money shot in a dark match. A tryout match saw Jimmy Snuka Jr. beat Elvis Elliott in what was described as not being good. Scott Vick beat Pete Gas with a jumping DDT. For heat, Hardys beat Snow and Blackman when Jeff pinned Blackman with a swanton. After the match, Snow brought out Harvey Cottontail, Harvey Whippleman in a bunny outfit, and he said, "Have an excellent Easter, Steve." Blackman then attacked Snow, seemingly breaking up the team. Bob Holly DDQ Saturn when both knocked down the ref. Too Hotty beat Malenko and Michinoku in a three-way for the title when he pinned Michinoku with a bulldog off the top. Malenko put Scotty in the cloverleaf after the match. Benoit cut a promo on Jericho. Jericho came back and said Benoit would have been a superstar in the 60s but not in the year 2000, and they got in a brawl ending in the back with Jericho applying the walls and Benoit tapping to set up their pay-per-view title match. Farouk beat Buchanan via DQ when Bossman interfered. Bradshaw tried to make the save, but they beat on him until Kane choke-slammed Boss Man and ran off Buchanan to end the show. For SmackDown, Road Dogg pinned Edge by reversing a roll-up. They showed Mike Tyson in attendance at the show in a clip of his angle with Austin from 1998. Triple H and Stephanie cut a promo. Triple H said he was never going to pedigree Linda, just trying to scare her, but that Shane was a hothead and a mama's boy since they are building to a three-way in May. But he forgave Shane and ripped on bringing Austin back. Every mention of Austin got a huge pop. Taz came out wearing the ECW belt and there was a loud ECW chant. Triple H acknowledged the ECW belt, saying he was going to show everyone why ECW sucks and WWF is great. Guerrero passed his GED test. Dudley's NC Guerrero and Rios. Guerrero said he was giving Rios another shot at being his partner. Lita accidentally hit Guerrero again. There was no finish, but Chyna basically left Lita to be powerbombed through a table by the Dudleys, and she did a stretcher job. Rikishi Show. Fans booed the bad finish. Rikishi then invited Sho to dance with him, which the crowd loved. After the dancing, Rikishi kicked Sho and took the glasses off him. Triple H beat Taz here. TNA beat Godfather and Brown when they had miscommunication and Godfather was pinned. Brown beat up Godfather after the match. X-Pac pinned Christian with the X Factor, but Edge and Christian laid out Dog and X-Pac after the match. Benoit beat Angle via DQ in an IC title match when Sho shoved Benoit off the top rope. Sho then chased Angle to the back. Benoit, starting a face turn, was mad because he didn't win the match cleanly. Insane Clown Posse was back, in clown suits, attacking Crash at the Ringling Brothers Circus, which was taking place next door at the Spectrum. Crash had elephant shit thrown at him in the brawl, but he escaped. Main event, ordered by Triple H earlier in the show, was Rock vs. Jericho with all heel lumberjacks. The heels kept breaking up both men's pins. Rock used two rock bottoms and went for the people's elbow, but Triple H hit Rock with the title belt and Jericho scored the pin. New York Daily News. The Times Square restaurant that hasn't been talked about is in the midst of being revamped. The story, quoting a WWF insider, blamed the problems on Parkview Restaurant Group that the WWF hired to run the place, saying they could be out of the picture within a week. WWF has stopped hyping the place, which has been empty except during major WWF events. The insider said that Parkview managed it like it was a theme restaurant while the WWF's idea was for it to be an entertainment complex. Sounds sort of like that statement there in the wrestling business and we're in the entertainment business, which in reality is a semantic way of saying nothing. The WWF is attempting to buy Parkview out of the current deal, according to the item. Of late, the WWF has basically stopped all promotion for the place. The WCW Nitro Grill in Las Vegas, which is a much less ambitious project, is suffering the same fate. They've laid off part of their staff and now have eliminated lunch service. Except on Monday nights during Nitro and during pay-per-view shows or when wrestlers make special appearances, there is rarely any business to speak of at the place. The entire item reported on a June 3rd show in Ontario regarding advertising The Rock wouldn't be there in last week's issue is totally incorrect. There isn't even a WWF show in that part of the country on that date. SummerSlam this year will be in Raleigh, North Carolina. Grandmaster Sexay Brian Lawler is already walking without a limp, so he should be in the ring very soon. Some notes on the April 13th SmackDown. Benoit and Malenko vs. Hardys was a real good TV match. Cat must be a genetic freak because nobody has ever grown so much hair in just one day. Moolah nearly killed Mae Young twice doing monkey flips since Mae really couldn't get all the way over. Cat's spear on Moolah, as bad as it was 1,000 times better than the one they did in San Jose the previous week, which was just about move for move the exact same match except Mae dropped an elbow instead of doing the lowest big splash ever for the win. They announced a WWF TV special on UPN on April 28. The interplay between Rock and Shane is just awesome. WWF Armageddon fell to number 20 on the charts this week with 62,179 units sold. Unlike most records which in its early weeks have a bullet, which indicates sales increasing from the previous week, the WWF sales for this record are similar to many in the rap genre, which open very strong and fade fast. By contrast, the previous CD, which wasn't rap, had much stronger legs and at this point has topped 1 million in sales directly to consumers, 1,015,965 as of last week's tally. Depositions began in the Martha Hart wrongful death lawsuit against WWFE and several other plaintiffs in Kansas City over the past week. TSN's Off the Record should be having a one-on-one interview with The Rock taped in May. TSN is also petitioning the CRTC to relax its standards on violence toward women. Because of the current standards, TSN is forced to edit all the women taking power bombs through tables off Raw and in the future, Nitro as well, which results in complaints from wrestling fans every Tuesday morning. Tom Howard, who had worked numerous dark matches at tapings over the past year, was released from his developmental deal. We need to make a ratings correction. Last year when Raw and Nitro opposed the NCAA basketball finals, it was the Raw the day after WrestleMania, and not the week after as we reported. The gist of the story is correct in that both the basketball and pro wrestling audience was far larger on that Monday 1 year ago than it was this season. Saturn on his website apologized to Hogan because Hogan did the angle with Kidman. The Team Extreme who worked the dark match at the April 4th tapings in San Jose was not Kit Carson and Chris Germany from Texas as many thought, but a tag team based in Southern California. The two were Justin McCulley, who has worked a shoot fighter gimmick in New Japan and also done some legitimate shoot fights in Japan for rings, and Aaron Aguilera, Southern California indie wrestler who goes by the ring name of Hardcore Kid, whose father is their ringside manager El Jefe. WWF is scoring good ratings in New Zealand as the April 8th show drew 126,200 viewers, making it the highest rated show on TV4, which is New Zealand's lowest rated free TV channel. Gangrel is out of action for at least 1 month due to a separated shoulder. Mick Foley will be taping an episode of Now and Again on CBS later this month. Rock's appearance for IWA in Puerto Rico on April 28 at Juan Lubriel Stadium in Bayamon will be in a tag match teaming with Kane against the Dudleys. WWF.com had an article on the Court TV special, basically saying that Court TV asked for an interview to talk about a different subject and not about the deaths of children that had been tied into copying pro wrestling moves. Because of that, they claimed Linda McMahon hadn't had time to prepare answers for the questions they were asking, as an apparent excuse for her not coming off well on the show. All I can tell you is that with zero exceptions, in every media interview I've ever done, a number well into the hundreds and maybe the thousands, not once have I had stipulations placed on what I would be asked, and not once was I ever given more than a broad outline of what would be asked, and usually not even that. The article insinuated Court TV was unethical by asking her questions she wasn't ready for. They also have the unedited version of the Catherine Cryer interview with Linda McMahon. She actually came across far worse in the WWF unedited version than in the very edited version the show aired. Cryer, who is a well-known trial lawyer, so is very good at this sort of thing, aggressively interviewed her for more than 20 minutes. Even though it was clear Cryer herself barely knew the subject, she had her looking very bad in many instances. McMahon avoided answering many questions and kept trying to divert the subject in others. While McMahon made valid points that in every one of the deaths, the parents deserve blame for having children too young supervising, or not being there or not responding to noises, and I'd agree they deserve primary blame in all cases well above whatever very minor blame if any pro wrestling deserves, which is probably different in every case, that still doesn't change that kids were killed through imitation of moves they learned watching pro wrestling. McMahon at one point brought up that the kids could have died imitating tackling as goes on in the NFL or violence from Walker, Texas Ranger, which is true, except they didn't. Neither show she mentioned appeals to as young a demographic, which makes their programming responsibility different, just as a comparison to afternoon soap operas, which she also brought up, or all-night porn on cable, which she smartly didn't, is ridiculous because for the same reasons. Kids didn't die from imitation of moves from those shows, just like one could argue that double juice matches because of spreading of AIDS are more lethal than overdoing steroids, cocaine or pain pills. Except that people have died in wrestling from the latter and nobody has died from double juice matches, so I'd worry more about the problems that have caused deaths as opposed to the ones that could on paper but never have. She did bring up injuries from high school football, which is a valid point if you are trying to argue that there are dangerous things for children other than pro wrestling, which hopefully nobody is ever trying to argue because that would be a stupid point. Far more media stories have been done about football injuries than have ever been done on wrestling until maybe this year. That's the same as when the steroid stories were written on wrestling in the early 90s and the people trying to defend wrestling against media stories by saying there are steroids in the Olympics and in football, so I write about wrestling, when there was 50 times as many media stories on steroids in those sports than ever in wrestling to begin with. Kids could die from imitating moves in a war movie, and when kids die from imitating a movie, there was a scene in a football movie years ago of players laying on a freeway which kids imitated and were run over, which caused a huge controversy regarding that movie at the time. That movie came under a ton of media scrutiny as well. McMahon claimed that the WWF doesn't spend a dime marketing to children, and when all the toys were brought up, claimed they were mainly, as she called them, adult collectibles, which is why they are sold at Toys R Us, I'd suppose. She stated more than once that the WWF doesn't market to kids. Cryer made her look bad even on the subject where it appeared Cryer was going to look bad because she didn't know what she was talking about, the Al Snow head controversy. When Cryer pointed out a female head with "Help Me" being written on the forehead, McMahon explained the Snow storyline. Cryer came back asking if an 8-year-old buying the toy would know the storyline, and McMahon said they would. Cryer then said if they don't market toward 8-year-olds and if they think they shouldn't be watching the show, how would the 8-year-old understand that storyline that explains the character? Cryer used numerous Vince Russo quotes about how when they write the show it is meant to be taken seriously. When McMahon tried to pass off some violent scenarios as comedy slapstick like on Saturday Night Live, and not meant to be taken seriously, talking about booking hangings, Bossman on the pay-per-view, which McMahon, who said the WWF was never done anything she believes is crossing the line but did say there does exist a line that shouldn't be crossed, and she defended by saying he wasn't hung for very long, actually he was, and Russo saying that when he wrote Raw, their proviso was to do as much as they could get away with. McMahon responded by saying Russo no longer works for the company, intimating he was fired for having that attitude as opposed to quitting for whatever reason he really left for. McMahon kept using that parents need to monitor what their kids are watching and some of what they do isn't appropriate even for some 14-year-olds, and parents should switch the channel if they don't like it. Cryer then brought up shows that air on Saturday mornings when everyone knows kids watch TV while parents are still in bed, and McMahon blamed the parents again, saying they need to wake up earlier. She said she felt no sense of responsibility to children watching the shows. In some comparisons for what the XFL is getting into, the NBA game on April 15 on NBC in prime time, Utah Jazz vs. San Antonio Spurs, drew a 3.2 rating. CBS had an Ice Wars special with figure skating that drew a 6.2. The country of Liberia is releasing a 9-set stamp package of The Rock. These are the first postage stamps anywhere in the world of a WWF personality. In this week's Billboard listings of top-selling rec sports videos, WWF occupied the top 5 spots ahead of the Super Bowl. The Rock's video remained number 1, followed by Austin vs. McMahon, Best of Raw, Austin, and WWF Most Memorable Moments of 1999. WWF also occupied spots number 6 through number 14, and had 16 of the top 20 spots. WCW had 1 Sting at number 18. The only non-wrestling videos in the top 20 were the Super Bowl, a motocross video at number 15, and a Michael Jordan video at number 17. A special main event on April 23 in Greensboro will have Rock and Hardys, from near Greensboro, against DX. The Raw show on May 29 in Vancouver, BC sold out the GM Place in about 20 minutes. SmackDown tapings on April 11 in Tampa, the Ice Palace drew a sellout 13,966, paying $354,003. House show on April 15 at Madison Square Garden drew a sellout 16,925, paying $509,499. Total in the building was 19,588. It was the largest non-pay-per-view gate in the history of wrestling at Madison Square Garden, which basically only means that the ticket prices are higher now than at any time in the past, and it was the 10th consecutive MSG sellout, which I have a feeling may be an all-time record, although there were periods before accurate records were kept, such as in the 70s when Pedro Morales and Bruno Sammartino were on top, that MSG sold out most of the time as well. House show April 16 in Pittsburgh drew 11,640, paying $352,801. Merchandise at the 2 tapings and 2 arena shows over the past week totaled $457,893, which is $8.46 per head. From MSG, Malenko kept the light-heavy title, beating Too Hotty with one of those double pin finishes, but Malenko raising his shoulder. Guerrero beat Taz in the European title match when China DDT'd Taz. Bossman and Buchanan beat Headbangers when Buchanan pinned Thrasher after a leg drop off the top. Kane then came out with Paul Bearer and chokeslammed Buchanan and destroyed the Bangers as well. Crash Holly beat Saturn in the hardcore match. Taz came out with a second ref, and while this was going on, Crash got the pin. Crash then ran away while Taz and Saturn fought. Edge and Christian won a 3-way over Dudleys and Hardys. Crowd was heavily into the Dudleys, particularly the 3D and table spots. DNA beat Snow and Blackman. Angle pinned Venus. Benoit pinned Jericho in the IC title match. Jericho got a great reaction. Good match. Rikishi Kershaw. They did a dance contest before the match, which the crowd got into. After the match, the two danced together and left the ring together. Triple H and X-Pac and Dog beat Rock and Acolytes in the main event. It was like a TV match as X and Dog and Acolytes all brawled to the back. Shane and Vince were at ringside. Earl Hebner was bumped, so Shane took over as ref and refused to count as Rock had Triple H pinned. Finally, Rock had Triple H pinned and Hebner recovered, but Vince pulled him out of the ring and decked him. Vince tried to attack Rock with a chair, but Rock got the chair. But before he could use it, he got ambushed by Triple H and was given a pedigree, and Shane counted the pin. One would suspect, based on Rock getting pinned in a send the fans home happy match, that he's getting the title on the pay-per-view. He almost has to at this point after the WrestleMania finish, or they're in danger of having the fans think he can't win the big one. The only other possible finish is Austin turning on Rock, but it seems several months early for that one because there is no point in the two of them wrestling each other until WrestleMania next year. At this point, Benoit seems to be the leading candidate for King of the Ring, perhaps by that point as a face. The WWFE stock at press time on April 18th closed at $13.75 per share. The skit being shot with Angle at Penn State about abstinence was almost stopped by local Penn State police, giving the WWF a hard time about shooting in the hub without a permit. The first skit took at least 10 takes because the producers had a hard time trying to organize the onlookers to where it looked like a normal day at class. The second skit with the couple making out took a long time because the crowd watching kept laughing when Angle delivered his punchline, and Angle also forgot his lines. The final segment had to be changed when one of the balloons on show's head popped and ruined his hat, so they cut out the visual of his face after that point. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,